Hey, remember the time we ranked every Family Guy character from worst to best? What, no cutaway gag? Oh, right, that's what we're doing today. This is the Family Guy character tier list.
Oh, and the adventure begins again.
Today we're starting in the F tier. For the characters we merely find shallow and pedantic, entertaining and likable are the two most important traits today.
I agree as well. Shallow and pedantic.
With that being considered, it's no surprise that Loretta Brown is our last place choice. Some fans might not even remember Loretta, but she was Cleveland's wife in the first few seasons of the show. Unlike her husband, Loretta was a generally unpleasant person. She was headstrong and blunt, which usually resulted in her being perceived as quite rude. She even resented Cleveland's passive, kind nature, and rather than discussing her grievances with him, decided to cheat on him with Quagmire. She does later apologize for this, even resisting Quagmire's attempts to tempt her into sleeping with him again, but that doesn't change the fact that her only character traits are mean and adulterous. The literal best thing we can say about Loretta is that she regretted cheating on her husband, which isn't even the bare minimum. As such, she's an easy pick for last place. Next up is Quahog's own very questionable educator, Principal Shepard.
Principal Shepard's not here.
Principal Shepard went from an absolute nothing character in the earlier seasons to an amoral scumbag in later ones. We can only assume that the writers were trying to capture the character of Principal Lewis from American Dad with this guy. A principal who's so over-the-top, unstable, and downright criminal that the mere fact that he's in charge of a school is as funny as it is terrifying. The problem is that, well, Shepard isn't really that funny. At least nowhere near funny enough to outweigh how creepy he is. In one episode, he even admits to having CP of his own students on his phone that he uses as leverage to get out of trouble when he drives drunk. That's two of the most depraved crimes in one single moment, and not a hint of remorse nor shame. Family Guy is generally fantastic at making awful people into fun characters, but Shepard sadly falls flat, and instead of being so awful it's hilarious, he's just awful. While he's nowhere near as awful, our next choice, Francis Griffin, is a hateful, bitter old man who loves the Lord and hates just about everything and everyone else. He only appears occasionally and pretty much just serves to make the Griffin's life a living hell. Like Loretta, he's outwardly mean and spiteful without enough humor nor redeeming qualities to make up for that. That said, his unpleasant demeanor did lead to a few funny gags in the few episodes he appeared in, and if nothing else, he was decent enough to tell Peter he wasn't his biological father in his dying moments. You might be upset we're placing Bertram in the bottom tier, but we have our reasons. In the classic episode in Mission Impossible, Bertram battles Stewie, who wants to stop him from entering his mother's womb and becoming his future brother. The two end up gaining mutual respect for each other and their rivalry, which is why it's a shame that Bertram doesn't end up being born until much later. But hey, at least there's plenty of opportunity to give Stewie a worthy rival and have some fun battles between them. Yeah, about that. They use him twice after the first episode. Like, he appeared in Sibling Rivalry, where he basically started a turf war with Stewie for control over the playground, and in The Big Bang Theory, where he went back in time to stop Stewie from being born. Both of these were fun episodes, and that's exactly why we placed Bertram in the F tier, because this character had so much potential, and they killed him off before using even a fraction of it. It's a shame, really. He wasn't the best, but he definitely deserved more than 3 episodes to shine in. There was another attempt to give Stewie a good rival, and it came in the form of Doug. He's a toddler who looks and sounds like a 30-year-old man who occasionally banters with Stewie.
So your mom's still taking you to the ladies' room to go pee-pee?
Actually, yes.
Yeah, me too.
Not really sure what the idea was here, but it wasn't a success. In the episode Snack Captain, Stewie casually reveals,
Oh, and Doug died in a commuter plane crash this morning.
That should tell you just how much the fans liked this guy. But I will admit, it was one of the first Family Guy gags in a while that made me laugh out loud. But no time to grieve that loss, even though we weren't. It's time to enter the D tier for characters who aren't good, but who are less bad. Quahog's inevitable teenage mean girl, Connie D'Amico, kicks off this category. We place Connie low on our list because she's not really a remarkable character at all. You know what's gonna go on whenever she's on screen. She's gonna say or do something really mean to Meg and maybe get some nice comeuppance for it. We won't place her any lower since she's a character you're supposed to dislike. Heck, there have even been a few attempts to flesh her out, like in one episode where she dates Chris and briefly becomes a much nicer person, but sadly that development has never stuck, and Connie's remained one of the least likable characters in Family Guy since her debut. Co-anchor of Channel 6 News, Diane Simmons, is next. Like Tom, she has her moments of good humor. Their on-screen banter is usually pretty entertaining. That's why it's a shame that Diane planned to frame Tom for the murders of James Woods, Muriel, and others in And Then There Were Fewer. Once this happened, Diane had to die. And thus her fun dynamic with Tom was over. It's one thing to be a murderer, and a very bad thing too, but to throw your partner in newscasting under the bus only makes you even worse. But that's not the worst part. She took Muriel Goldman from us. Remember Muriel Goldman? She was Mort's wife.
She was so generous. We were married.
But more than that, she was also Neil's mom. And even more than that, okay, you get the idea. We literally don't have anything notable to say about Muriel. Even the show itself makes fun of just how little impact her death really had in that one scene where all the characters, dead and alive, make cameos in No Giggity, No Doubt. When Muriel's ghost appears, Mayor West shoves her aside as if to say, "Get out of here, you're not one of the important dead characters." And he's right. I have to say that, unironically, I was sadder when Johnny and Vern died. These two were running gag characters in the earlier seasons. Vern would make some fast-paced observations about whatever was going on, only to be played off by Johnny with an admittedly catchy piano riff. Like Doug, we guess they weren't too popular with audiences because in Saving Private Ryan, Stewie kills both of them off on screen and reveals,
Okay, they're dead, all right? We're not going to be seeing them again.
almost like he's reassuring the audience of it. But they would, in fact, reappear as ghosts. Not much else to say about these two, but Johnny being in hell for liking little boys was a pretty funny plot twist. Piano skills can't redeem you for everything, man. Up next is Peter's former boss, Angela. No disrespect to the late Carrie Fisher, who brought Angela to life. It's just that Angela was a character who, despite being pretty prominent, wasn't really all that impactful. She was mean enough to notice, but never really enough for her to feel like a threatening antagonist. Well, with one exception. The episode Peter Assment in Season 8 is probably her most memorable appearance, in which she repeatedly harasses Peter in the workplace. She then tried to guilt trip him into sleeping with her by threatening suicide, and sadly succeeded. Not a great track record, but she did have a few funny moments at least. Unlike Angela, our next entry, Bonnie Swanson, actually had a good start in the series. Back when Joe was a total badass, if sometimes a jerk,
Get out of there!
Bonnie was his supportive wife, whose character was basically described in 2 words: pregnant and nice.
Bonnie, you've been pregnant for like 6 years.
Okay, so it wasn't the most memorable start, but it was leaps and bounds better than who she'd eventually turn into. In the later seasons, Bonnie became a complete scumbag who'd regularly cheat on Joe with his knowledge, mind you, and even has plotted to kill him sometimes. Okay, granted, almost every character in the show has become a horrible person by the double-digit seasons, but Bonnie went from super nice to really freaking mean, which makes her decline hurt a lot more. It's a really jarring, mean-spirited transition. A lot of people weren't too fond of Vinny when he was introduced. It's not exactly hard to see why. The infamous season 12 episode Life of Brian saw Brian killed off in what was absolutely a lesson about not taking your loved ones for granted and totally not a desperate attempt to boost ratings. Motives aside, he was temporarily replaced with Vinny, a smooth talking dog with a bit of a mob boss persona. While killing off Brian just to bring him back literally 2 episodes later was a terrible writing decision, we don't feel it's fair to blame poor Vinny for it. The guy was only in 3 episodes after all, and one of them was Christmas Guy, which had that legendary drink the nog Carter scene.
You know, I still don't like Christmas, but I kind of like what we just did.
We can't possibly hate him with that in mind, but sadly he's forever associated with one of Family Guy's lowest moments. That loses him points regardless, which is a shame because he honestly isn't a bad character. He's just also not Brian. Rounding out this category is Babs Pewterschmidt. Unlike those before her, Babs isn't this low because of any particular flaws or negative associations with the character. Babs is in the D tier because she's just barely a character. She's only really involved in episodes Carter is prominent in, and even then she rarely gets any time outside of his shadow. We've reached the middle territory of our tier list now. These characters aren't anywhere near the best nor most iconic in the series, but they serve their purposes well and have their own fans here and there. The C tier awaits. First up in this section is Buzz Killington. Like Johnny and Vern, he only shows up for a few gags here and there. He's the last guy on this list you'd want to invite to your party, but honestly, you just gotta respect his sheer confidence. The guy shows up to parties and other events he seemingly wasn't even invited to, and just shoots his shot to try and have a good time with everybody by talking about the history of typewriters or cornflakes or something. He might be a buzzkill, but with a last name like Killington, how uncool can he be?
It's so far you're a bigger buzzkill than Buzz Killington.
This one might be a stretch, but we're giving a 3-fold entry to Cleveland's new family, Donna, Roberta, and Rollo Tubbs. These 3 are all decent enough characters in their own right. While the Cleveland show is nowhere near as renowned as Seth MacFarlane's other sitcom juggernauts, some of these characters introduced were at least fairly entertaining. Rollo's sass, Donna's short-tempered mama bear personality, and Roberta being both superficial and not totally awful make for a pretty fun dynamic with the more mild-mannered Cleveland. Well, they would have made for a better one if the spin-off's version of Cleveland wasn't basically turned into a clone of Peter. Sadly, even though they are technically characters in Family Guy now, the show rarely utilizes them. These 3 ooze potential, and while they're fine characters as they are, it's a shame that they're hardly given any time to shine. When they are, it's usually just to play the good neighbors who juxtapose the Griffins, sort of like the Flanders in The Simpsons. Sorry to say it, guys, but outdoing the Griffin family dynamic isn't a tough thing to do. By now, you're probably expecting the characters to start shining, and if that's the case, look no further than the greased-up naked deaf guy.
Don't judge me! I'm just doing my thing!
Just don't look too closely, you might get blinded. And if you try to catch this legend, you'll definitely get disappointed. Trust us, you won't catch him. If you don't believe us, just ask him.
You're never gonna catch me!
Not that he'll hear you.
I think we are doing deaf jokes at this point.
The next member of the Not Nearly Enough Screen Time Club, Olivia, is up next. She was Stewie's old acting rival, and like Bertram, there was so much potential for a series-spanning feud between these two, and it was definitely underexplored. But unlike Bertram, Olivia got a bit more time to shine, and honestly, their dynamic was a lot more memorable. The tension between these two ranges from bickering celebrities to pint-sized divorce drama, which leads to their plots being some of the most entertaining Stewie stories in the series. If only they'd use Olivia more, but major bonus points for her contribution to the musical numbers. The newer season's answer to Bruce, Elle Hitler, is up next. Like everyone's favorite walking gay stereotype, Elle is categorized by her sweet personality and contagious laugh. She's really the closest thing Quahog has to a fully pure soul. At her best, she's one of the kindest and most wholesome characters in the ensemble cast, and at her worst, well, we can see how she'd be found a little annoying by some. Not us though, we're just glad to have her. You rock those Garfield bobbleheads, girl, nothing abnormal about it.
Oh, how can I ever repay you?
Money?
Up next we have Herbert's pet dog, Jesse. Look, I know he's a possible accessory to a sex offender and child predator, but just look at the little dude. Our only criticism of him, aside from the obvious association with Herbert, is that he'd be even cuter if he had his own little walker to match Herbert's, since basically everything else he has matches him, even down to that iconic Back when Cleveland took time off for his spin-off, Jerome was his temporary replacement as the token black friend of the group.
Gentlemen, we got us a black man.
Except, honestly, he never really got a ton of time to build rapport with Peter and the others. He's a nice enough guy, but what Jerome lacks is much of a personality. That said, Peter's paranoia over him having been with Lois over 20 years ago was pretty hilarious, so we'll give him points for some comedy, however unintentional it was. Standing here, our next spot is Asian news reporter Trixia Takanawa. While she's mostly used for some occasional news gags, her over-the-top accent and deadpan delivery makes her a fun character to see pop up here and there.
Now I will have my normal post-news review from my mom in her car.
She also managed to have a pretty decent episode of her own, Carter and Tricia, where she managed to get into bed with Carter to have him expose the shady underbelly of some of his business practices. Pretty sketchy stuff, but also a really neat story by Family Guy standards. Hopefully that career is going well. And wagging his happy little tail at the end of his category is Brian's cousin, Jasper. Bruce may be the show's most iconic gay character, but we still couldn't forget about Jasper.
Oh no, they's doing gay jokes without me.
He's Brian's cousin, and while he only makes scarce appearances throughout the show, we love him for his ride-or-die mentality for Brian. The two seem to have a genuinely healthy relationship, and it's nice to see Brian legitimately getting along with someone who's rather different from himself. You've also got to respect the sheer confidence and flamboyance the guy exudes. And honestly, with the kind of guy Brian has become in later seasons, man, we really want you back, Jasper. Brian could use a positive influence right about now. With that, we're finally reaching the characters who might come to mind when you say Family Guy. The memorable one-offs to likable recurring characters, these are the B-tier characters. First up is one of the series' most memorable celebrity cameos, James Woods. Few moments capture the sheer essence of those first 7 seasons of Family Guy, like the musical number between Peter and James Woods. If that's not goofy enough for you, just remember how the episode descends into James Woods obsessing over Peter yandere style and trying to steal his identity and life. It seems like every episode with James Woods was a big event, but by far the most notable was the murder mystery, and then there were fewer, where he went from a truly remorseful man to a red herring that kickstarted the real stakes of the special. His association with some of the best episodes of Family Guy altogether makes him one of the most memorable recurring side characters and earns him a lot of points. Just keep an eye on your identity and your Reese's Pieces around this guy.
Ooh, piece of candy.
As tempting as it would be to place her lower, Meg Griffin has made it to the higher half of our tier list, even if she's our least favorite of the Griffins. Perhaps the most noticeable difference between the original 3-season run of Family Guy right away in season 4 was the poorer treatment of Meg by the family, especially Peter.
It's a girl. Can you check again?
It's a shame, but if nothing else, it makes us root for Meg a lot of the time. Even if pity is the main reason, it's always nice to see Meg get a win here and there. She's definitely the closest thing to a decent person in the Griffin household, and while she's far from the funniest character, she still deserves a lot better than she usually gets. The later seasons have tried to give Meg a bit more of a personality with her "how do you do, fellow kids"-esque lingo and her unconventional talents like making cookies with her tears. It's nice that they're trying to do something aside from bullying her constantly, but Meg still just isn't quite as interesting as most of the ensemble cast, sadly. We couldn't help but give Stewie's teddy bear Rupert a spot on our list. Yeah, he's not actually sentient, or at least I'm not sure if he is, but come on, just look at him. Isn't he adorable? What, you're not convinced? Okay, well, why not take a trip into Stewie's strange imagination? Now look at him. Mic dropped. My mic! Good evening, here's Tom Tucker with Channel 5 News. Tom is one of the 2 wisecracking news anchors who's been in Quahog since the beginning, and unlike his former co-host, he's actually not a terrible guy. In addition to being pretty funny, Tom Tucker has also shown some moments of sincerity. From his care for his son Jake, despite feeling embarrassed about his facial deformity, to the paternal role he takes on with Peter during the former's fling with his mom. Somehow, Tom has been around as a running gag character since the start, and we still aren't tired of him, which has earned him a respectable spot on our list. Somebody has to help uncover Nicki Minaj's true identity as a bear, after all.
Nicki Minaj is a bear?
Local high school simp Neil Goldman is up next. Looking back, I feel like we were a little too harsh on this guy in our worst Family Guy characters video. Yeah, we do see why Neil would be disliked, but this guy's just way too funny to not give a decent spot on the list. While he's certainly the furthest thing from a saint, he also does have some standards, like when he throws away his contract to Meg's girlfriendhood? Look, words aren't important. The point is, Neil was willing to throw away a shot to get with his dream girl once he found out she wasn't actually into it, or him. Heck, he even refused to cheat on her when Lois came onto him in cosplay, and he also didn't press charges, since that would have been 1,000% statutory, you know what. He's still a bit of a creep sometimes, but his actions in that plotline have definitely managed to increase our respect for Neil. Now we move on to one of Family Guy's most controversial characters, Ida Quagmire. Quagmire's father turned mother. That's right, Family Guy, of all things, has a recurring transgender rep. While she's not always portrayed sensitively and really what minority is in this show, Ida is a surprisingly wholesome character for a show like Family Guy. Take the episode Trans Fat, for example, where Peter transitions to womanhood just to reap the supposed benefits of being trans, only for Ida to rightfully call him out on his nasty behavior. But when Peter's learned his lesson, Ida forgives him quickly and even helps him set up a, well, I'll let you guess the first letter of Ick starter. Hint, it's not a K. Ida is a genuinely good person, and her relationship with Glenn is genuinely quite sweet. She's not exactly the funniest character, but she's a less offensive, more well-written character than you'd expect from Family Guy. Still, this is Family Guy, so, you know, humor is kind of a top priority.
Oh, it's okay, I'm transgender.
Oh, I had no idea. Do whatever you want all the time.
We'll save higher spots for the more laugh-out-loud characters. So, staying in the LGBT character territory, we have Mr. Weed, an often forgotten character from the first couple of seasons. He was a character who was both funny and genuinely likable. Unlike Angela, Mr. Weed genuinely cared for his workers. He showed concern for the safety of his workers by sending Peter to women's sensitivity classes and openly accepted his invitation to dinner at the Griffin home, which sadly would spell his end. It's a shame, really. Imagine if he'd gotten to interact with Jasper or Bruce. Still, for the short time we had him, Mr. Weed was a refreshingly nice boss character in the world of animation, which notoriously has some pretty cruddy ones, to put it lightly. Mr. Weed walked so Mr. Boss could run, and for that, we'll allow this dearly departed icon a respectable spot on our list. Say what you will about Family Guy having run for way too long, but at least we got Mayor Wild West out of the newer seasons. Look, there's no replacing Adam West, but come on, giving him a cousin named Wild, who's a cowboy voiced by Sam Elliott? You can't place that in front of us and not expect us to appreciate it. Wild West is a genuinely nice guy who also casually has godlike abilities, from a mustache that can withstand a chainsaw to the ability to float and open locks on jail cells by asking them nicely. Really, with how mean most of the Family Guy cast has become in later seasons, it's so refreshing to have at least one character who's just a wholesome, nice dude. Just don't ask him if he's ever killed a man. Next we have a one-time appearance, Pearl Burton. Pearl is this high for one reason, and one reason only. Her sole appearance was in Brian Wallows and Peter's Swallows, one of the absolute best episodes of Family Guy. Her story as an unappreciated musician tainted by her time singing advertising jingles was surprisingly heartbringing for an edgy comedy show, and her time with Brian made for by far the latter's closest thing to a brush with true love in the entire series. If only they'd met earlier in life, things could have been different between them. Still, this short-lived romance made for one of the most gut-wrenching stories in the series' history, and showed that this show can actually be more than just funny evil baby and fat man. Rounding out this category is Chris's old frenemy, the Evil Monkey. One of the most iconic running gags in the whole series, the Evil Monkey isn't exactly true to his name. It turns out that he used to be a totally nice dude. That was until he caught his wife and best friend in bed together. Later on, he's able to find peace by befriending Chris, which it turns out was his goal all along. It was this exact moment that the Evil Monkey became simply the Monkey. And after a bomb drop like that, where can we go but up? These are the characters who really helped to make Quahog the hilariously mess up place that it is. This is the A tier. First up in the A tier, we have the iconic Blackie weather forecaster himself, Ollie Williams. To put it like he would, he's pretty good. Thanks, Ollie. Now let's talk about Seamus. As another character who's been showing up since the earlier seasons, we're honestly surprised that this peg-limbed pirate hasn't had a single episode dedicated to him yet. It'd be fun to see him sailing the high seas on his ship, or is he himself the ship?
But he's not made of wood. Nobody is.
Honestly, the character design is like 90% of why he's so high. The other 10% is that he just seems like a nice guy. By warning Peter about Daggermouth, he basically protected him from bankruptcy and death all in one go. That's something to be admired, as is the fact that he's the first one to check on Peter when he posts a cryptic Facebook status. Considering he doesn't even have hands, that's both kind and impressive. Next is the walking stereotype, Mort Goldman. He's one of those butt-of-the-joke characters. Although he's certainly not treated anywhere near as harshly as Meg, the joke with Mort is usually also on Mort. And honestly, we're alright with that. He's likable enough to make you root for him, but he has enough negative traits that enable you to laugh at least some of his misfortunes.
Peter, for God's sake! I am so sorry, Mort.
No problem, Lois. That's just how people say hello to me.
Another simple reason he's gotten so high is his voice acting, which has to be one of the funniest in the show. Everything this guy says ends up being so much funnier than it needs to be on the sole basis of him sounding like dried up SpongeBob.
It's no use. We'll never find the rare
lizards in.
It's dig them. His happy face may not be mustached yet, but we're still giving a high placement to Cleveland Jr. Whether you're looking at his skinny, hyperactive self in the earlier seasons or his rounder, more hostile one in the Cleveland show and onward, Cleveland Jr. is a national treasure, and at the same time, he's absolutely terrifying. He's one of those great characters who's totally chill and harmless 95% of the time, but that other 5%, oh man, you do not want to be around for that other 5%. Let's not forget his joking threat to Peter after he accidentally shot him in the arm.
You ever feel the cool steel of a switchblade pressed against your temple?
Just don't mess with him, his dad, nor Larry the Leopard, and you'll be just fine. Next is the other teenage boy on Spooner Street, Chris Griffin. Well, I guess there's Kevin too, but nobody cares about Kevin, man, let's be real. On the other hand, if there's anyone who can give Peter's lack of brains a run for its money, it's Chris. His stupidity reaches downright terrifying levels, and the absolute chaos this dude causes as a result is a sight to behold. The scene where he can't figure out which one is the real dad is one of the funniest gags in the whole series, honestly. What impresses us most about Chris is that he's remained mostly consistent in his characterization. Aside from his perversion being amped up like he's a comic relief character in a shonen anime, he's a pretty nice kid and manages to have a lot of really funny moments, especially when he's paired up with Herbert for a subplot. That's how you know it's gonna be a great episode. It's also always funny when Chris has a weirdly self-aware moment here and there, like suddenly asking Herbert point blank if,
"Are you a pedophile?"
Either Chris is fully aware and doesn't have a problem with it, or Herbert has that memory eraser from Men in Black. Personally, my guess is the latter. When it comes to iconic running jokes in Family Guy, Ernie the giant chicken can't be beat. Peter and him have been squaring off since season 2, and this feud has been on site for 22 seasons. Frankly, we can only imagine it'll get more intense. While some have grown tired of the fights getting longer and bloodier, we think they're actually a gold mine of potential, especially considering how much of pop culture Family Guy hasn't tackled yet. Maybe we'll see Peter sing a song to Ernie about how he can be a better person, like something from Steven Universe or Has Been Hotel. Or maybe we'll see a fight animated in the style of a shonen anime, like that one episode of Gumball. These are free ideas, Fox. It's a gold mine, you just gotta start digging. Peter's marginally better half, Lois Griffin, is up next. Like Peter, Lois is quite similar to her counterpart from The Simpsons, said counterpart of course being Marge, but while Lois was initially portrayed as a caring, compassionate mother, she also had a mean streak that came out pretty darned often. From public drunkenness to a temporary obsession with martial arts, even down to threatening to tear down the Christmas tree because she ran out of paper towels, Lois showed both the best and worst sides of being a caring mother. Although she's morally declined in recent years, Lois becoming more and more unhinged is no doubt a good choice in terms of comedy. Rarely is Lois stuck in the background of Peter's schemes. At best, she's the force that reels him in, and at worst, she's a more hilariously over-the-top threat than even him. Whether she's reeling Peter in or getting into shenanigans of her own, Lois is a nice addition to whatever plotline she's a part of. Just don't give her a bad review on Airbnb unless you want to get doxxed. Now, if you're in Quahog for long, you'll probably need medical attention at some point. In that case, we'd recommend quite literally anyone but Dr. Hartman. This hilariously incompetent doctor is a riot in every scene he's in. Whether he's getting distracted 100 times before telling Peter his diagnosis or straight up hiding from the police before he comes in, Dr. Hartman is medical malpractice personified.
Hey, do you know where I could find any books about, the pancreas?
While we'd never suggest him as an actual practitioner, he's still really dang funny, and the fact that the episode New Kidney in Town reveals that the Griffins are literally his only patients left makes it even better.
Well, the truth is, you folks are my only remaining patients.
Next, we have another character with the same voice actor, Carter Pewterschmidt. Lois's well-to-do father is the closest thing to a main antagonist that Family Guy has. He's certainly one of the most evil characters in the cast, but in the world of Family Guy, that rarely makes him less likable. Whether Carter is being a legitimate threat or just a needless savage, his relentless antagonism makes him a character who can spice up pretty much every scene he's in. Just don't ask him for money. Trust us on that one. He might or might not force you to dig for it in a jar of salt and barbed wire.
Why do you keep these things together?
Wait, you guys hear that?
Oh no.
Oh no.
Oh no!
Oh no.
Oh yeah!
Kool-Aid Man is next. We've said plenty of gag characters have been around since the beginning, but for the Kool-Aid Man, we mean it literally. He's been around since episode 1, crashing through walls whenever the situation calls for it, and even sometimes when it doesn't. He gets extra points for overcoming his parents' prejudice over Yoo-Hoo bottles. Also, even more bonus points for this being one of the funniest gags in the whole show.
Oh, no.
We've almost reached S tier, and it's time to get back to the ladies of the cast. Jillian wasn't in the series for long, but she's easily the closest thing Brian's ever had to a consistent love interest. She has the brain of a house cat.
Hey, maybe it was that cat who was the murderer. Let me ask him. Meow, meow, meow? Meow, 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 meow?
But the heart of, I don't know, something with a big heart, like the Grinch after he returned Christmas. The point is, Jillian is a total sweetheart. She's as nice as she is stupid, and even then, she's smart enough to know that she deserves someone who loves her for who she is, which is why it's a shame that her husband got killed off in the murder mystery. There aren't a lot of people in Quahog who deserve a truly happy ending, but Jillian is one of them, and we've got to be honest, we kind of miss her. But when it comes down to the best female character in this show, come on, we all know it's Consuela. You disagree?
No, you agree.
You think she should go in S tier?
No, she stay here.
No.
We've reached a true dead end for this tier, because just outside of our top 10 is Death. Voiced by the late great Norm Macdonald, Family Guy's interpretation of the Grim Reaper isn't a scary villain. Rather, he's just a chill guy who's doing his job and is even willing to work with people to help fix their lives. On top of being one of the best examples of Family Guy's dark humor, Death is a surprisingly nice guy who helped Peter multiple times to clean his act up. I mean, none of them lasted, of course, but at least he tried. Death is a surprisingly reliable friend of Peter, allowing for some pretty good plot lines like trying to help him save his marriage to Lois or showing him what his alcoholism will do to him without some serious effort to change. Now it's time for the cream of the crop. These are Family Guy's greatest characters. This is the S tier. This tier is going to be full of exclusively major recurring characters, with one exception, Bernie the hamster. He's a friendly little hamster with a funny voice who broke into the Griffin household just to befriend Peter. The best part is that they treat him so nicely for the 30 seconds of screen time he gets in the series. He'd undoubtedly be number one if he ever had an episode to shine in, but perhaps the Family Guy crew knows that we couldn't handle Bernie's true power of friendship. Who else but Glenn Quagmire could take the next spot? Quagmire is a character who needs no introduction, really. He's probably the first character who comes to most viewers' minds when the topic of perverted cartoon characters is brought up. Quagmire is a great comic relief character. He's known for saying some of the most out-of-pocket things you could imagine, and then some you wouldn't even dare to imagine.
How old are you?
16.
18? You're first.
Mom!
I like where this is going.
While he might be a total creep and a literal sex offender, Quagmire is in a show that allows him to still be beloved for the fact that the show knows this. Like any other character, Quagmire is meant to be as unpredictable and wild as possible, and he gets some of the funniest scenes in the show as a result. He can be a bit much sometimes though, and we will admit, it's kinda weird when the later seasons try to make him into this super soft-hearted guy when he's like, this man is a serial sex offender. Are we really gonna pretend that didn't happen?
Hey, Death, can you leave that body here for another 5 minutes?
Hey, Peter. The next member of Peter's friend group, Joe Swanson, is up next. Sometimes badass, sometimes sad ass, but always entertaining ass. Whatever adjective you want to use to describe him, Joe is a character who always has something to offer.
Oh, Joe, that was amazing.
I know. I was there.
The wheelchair-bound cop who's been around since season 1, Joe is a core member of Peter's friend group, and he more or less acts as its moral backbone most of the time. While he's not shy to get involved in some of Peter's shenanigans, his role as a police officer always ups the tension of whatever story he's part of, and his crippled body makes you want to see him succeed all the more. Like the majority of Family Guy characters, though, Joe has changed a lot in recent years. He's gone from a super cool Giga Chad who didn't let his disability define him to a downright pitiful guy whose wife and friends constantly abuse and berate him. They've made him into a very Bill Dotereve-esque character who's more or less there to be the butt of the joke, but with a lot less empathy thrown his way. Joe honestly deserves better, but he's never lacked too much in terms of likability, and Patrick Warburton gives one of the series' most iconic vocal performances too.
Listen, I don't know who this is, but you better cut it out.
He's not the only character on our list connected to the phrase, "Oh no," but Bruce has made it his catchphrase, meaning he'd best stay away from the Kool-Aid Man.
Oh, and the adventure begins again.
Out of all the recurring characters in the series, Bruce is arguably the kindest and friendliest of the bunch. Sure, he's used to tell a lot of gay jokes, but that's not his only character trait. Whether he's running an Alcoholics Anonymous group, helping the Griffins get a ghost out of their house, or even just playing a xylophone to fulfill Peter's dream of bowling like Fred Flintstone, Bruce is a guy you can pretty much always count on. But while we've mentioned a few characters' vocal performances, the character voices by Mike Henry, including Bruce, are probably our favorites in that regard. His soft-spoken demeanor is as soothing as it is inexplicably hilarious, especially when they give his bottom-coded voice to random side characters. Bruce has been kind enough to lend his voice to everyone, from a xenomorph to this one giant rat, and in both scenes he's surprisingly honest and straightforward, or gay-forward in this case.
Oh, now y'all get back up inside me, little mouth.
If there were ever a character who embodied the phrase out of pocket, it would undoubtedly have to be Herbert the pervert. This guy's entire character is that he's a serial pedophile. When you hear that iconic high-pitched voice, also Mike Henry by the way, you just know you're in for one of the absolute funniest moments in the series. But Herbert isn't just comic relief, he's also a skilled musician. Everyone rightly talks about how great of a singer Seth MacFarlane is, but let's not sleep on Herbert's pipes. Even if they're literally always him singing covers of songs about him thirsting for his 13-year-old neighbor, there's little room for doubt that he's putting his whole entire soul into those numbers, especially Somewhere That's Green. Audrey walked so Herbert could run. The reason Herbert makes it so high is the simple fact that he's the absolute embodiment of what makes Family Guy so unforgettable.
Everybody but Chris, just keep your pants on and let's figure a way out of this.
Few other shows would even attempt to make a character whose whole shtick is being a child predator, much less to have that character appear several times a season, yet Herbert stuck around Family Guy for a good 20 seasons before the show finally decided to give him the proverbial axe. As weird as I feel saying this, I really hope they bring him back.
Well, he often said he wanted to explode all over me. He Fine we did.
We've entered the top 5, and this is where the cast gets a little harder to rank. I wish we could put Brian Griffin higher up on the list. Now, I won't beat around the bush. With most characters in the series, we've done our best to not take their seasonal rot into account too much today, but with Brian, it's particularly harder to ignore. A character who began as Peter's conscience, developing into a hopeless romantic, struggling with his identity and emotions, devolving into a more hypocritical quagmire was pretty jarring. Brian isn't all bad, even in the later seasons. Heck, his more narcissistic personality is still pretty entertaining. It's like what happened with Peggy from King of the Hill. Morally, he fell pretty far, but in terms of humor, he arguably got better as the show went on. Regardless, Bry's earlier rendition is still incredibly charming to this day. He's as loyal as he is sarcastic, acting as man's best friend in both senses of the word. He would act as Peter's sounding board when he needed to vent, offering him advice and comfort when the situation demanded it, even if that meant dancing in a banana suit while shaking maracas. Brian acted as the moral backbone of the family, which was doubly funny since he's, a dog.
Which one were you again?
I was the one who could talk.
And the episodes that showed him struggling to find his own individual identity were always fantastic. Brian episodes, when they're good, are some of the greatest in the whole series. Brian wallows in Peter's swallows, Brian in love, the man with two Brians. When Brian cooks, he can cook pretty well. But just outside of the top 3 is probably the most consistent character in the ensemble cast, Cleveland Brown. While a spin-off series made him into a black version of Peter, more or less, even therein, he can be pretty entertaining when his straight man shtick is allowed to shine. But we're talking Family Guy today, and thankfully, Cleveland remains pretty great throughout this show's whole run. Since earlier seasons, Cleveland was always the voice of reason in Peter's friend group. He's kind, mild-mannered, and a people-pleaser who constantly endangers himself as a result.
This is how people-pleasers die!
I feel you, man. He's one of those characters whose kindness doesn't exist just as a way to make him the butt of a joke, either. Cleveland is a genuinely caring, gentle guy who's reluctant to even be angry at his cheating wife, or quagmire during that story arc. What boosts Cleveland so high up is that not only does he have his own incredibly catchy theme song, but he took the failure of his spin-off in stride and remains a devoted friend to Peter and the gang. Heck, even as late as season 21, he gets Peter a job as a mail carrier and forgives him when he does his thing and sabotages him. Cleveland is the friend that nobody quite deserves, but that everyone wants, and we're more than happy to put his happy mustached face as high as 4th place. We've got into the top 3, and if you're wondering where those good old-fashioned family values on which we used to rely are, here's Peter Griffin to show you the way to them. Such old-fashioned values include drinking alcohol like water, attempting to shoot his friends, marrying his own son to share his inheritance, blowing up hospitals, so on, so forth. In the earlier seasons, Peter was, as the show's Hulu description calls him, an endearingly ignorant dad. He always meant well and would do whatever was necessary for his family, even if it took him an entire episode to figure out what that was. Whether he goes undercover at Meg's school to become popular enough to stop a drug epidemic, or create a lovable mascot to teach kids not to litter, Peter's good intentions, poor execution brand of living never ceases to be entertaining. That said, well, you remember how we opened up that description? Peter has devolved from that endearingly ignorant dad description to an endearingly sociopathic dad. But we're willing to turn the other cheek on this one because, if nothing else, Peter is genuinely just too funny to not be somewhat endeared by. Yeah, he can be genuinely awful at times, but Peter somehow manages to avoid being hateable 9 times out of 10. And that's all thanks to just how dumb and funny he is.
Quick, Peter, say something so he thinks you know what he's talking about. Words.
There's little room for doubt that this Family Guy was more lovable in the first few seasons, but he's one aspect of the show who's never fully lost his charm, giving him a generous 3rd place spot on our list. Just don't ask him whether or not he's heard. We've now reached the holder of the Silver Medal of Greatness, and Mayor Adam West wants to make this video one you'll never forget.
I want to make this a night you'll never forget.
This one scene pretty much tells you everything you need to know about Adam West and Family Guy. For starters, yes, this is the actual Adam West, and before there was Wild West, this absolute force of chaos was Quahog's unpredictably hilarious mayor.
My God, I'm a tomato!
I do genuinely like Wild, but you just can't replace Mayor West. Every scene this guy is in is an absolute gem because there's actually no way to predict what his next move will be. In one episode, he orders a pizza, only for the Noid to stomp all over it, which prompts West to give him the beating of his now ended lifetime.
Perhaps it was the Noid who should have avoided me.
Mayor West also supports the troops and pays tribute to those who fell in the recent Gulf conflict by building a solid gold statue of Dig Them, the Sugar Smacks frog. Those are just a few personal favorites, but West is one of the series' most laugh-out-loud characters and one we dearly miss. There's just something about making a celebrity a legitimately insane politician, then getting said celebrity to voice his counterpart. That's quintessential Family Guy humor. That early season's absurdity is exactly what made this show so fun, but there's one character who just can't win. I'm sure you already know who the Gold Medal of Greatness goes to to today. Victory belongs to none other than the adorably evil Stewie Griffin. More or less the mascot of the whole series, Stewie is naturally the series' counterpart to Maggie Simpson. But they had an interesting concept with him. What if, instead of his character being Baby, Stewie was more a maniacal genius with an inexplicable British accent, and furthermore, it's never really explicitly stated whether the others can understand him. This is already a hilarious character concept, and it led to Stewie being one of the show's funniest and most memorable characters.
Master? And a surprisingly quick erection for Stewie.
From his attempts at world domination and matricide to his flamboyant tendencies, Stewie was always an icon who was both funny and genuinely intimidating when he needed to be. Whether he's trying to kill his own mother or just flat out roasting the other family members, Stewie has never lacked in entertainment value. But what boosts him up to number one? Well, we've mentioned that most of the characters have declined in recent years, but Stewie is a very impressive exception. I mean, he's definitely changed, his character is still a genius, and he's definitely a morally questionable one, but he's also leaned way more into his flamboyance than before. He's less of a villain and more of a kid struggling with his identity. Weirdly enough, Stewie is a character who can be both one of the most diabolical ones in the whole cast and one of the more lovable, endearing ones, and he plays both of them perfectly. The sheer charisma this baby exudes ensures that even in the weakest seasons of the show, he's bound to have some funny lines of dialogue, and if that's the case, we don't need to explain how hilarious he is in the better ones. Stewie's truly the heart of this series. He's changed a lot through 22 seasons, but he's never lost any of his charm nor entertainment value, making him a pretty easy choice for the best character in Family Guy history. I think this victory calls for a sexy party!
It was a hit and run by a drunk driver today at Quahog Park. 2 children are missing.
I was just there.
It seems today that all you see is violence in movies and sex on TV. Luckily, there's a Family Guy which has all of that and much, much more, with one of the most hilariously wild casts of characters in cartoon history. With more characters, more episodes, and more of those ever coveted funny moments. Today we've got a massive good to evil video that includes every notable character in Quahog.
Hey, sorry, man. Am I late? What I missed? Oh, thank God you're here. What do I do?
Tell him to keep playing. He's in too deep.
I'm Kristijan with Wicked Binge, and this is Family Guy characters, good to evil.
Well, if you're looking for someone with issues, I think you've found your candidate.
As usual, we'll be starting with the most good character and working our way down to the most evil. These are Quahog's friendliest faces, the good section. Taking the gold medal of good is the most unfortunately named citizen of Quahog. Say hi, Elle Hitler, but actually, maybe you word it differently. Unlike most of Quahog's other citizens, Elle doesn't really seem to have any super bizarre defining character traits. She's a big Garfield fan and has an affinity for puns, but her main characteristic is really just pure positive energy. She tends to make cheesy jokes that often make those around her cringe or chuckle, and either way, it's always followed up by that infectious laugh.
These are gonna go straight to my thighs. Now, if only I could find a man to do the same.
A lot of people might say she's obsessed, but we'd say she's pretty normal. A character with such infectious positivity and really no bad characteristics is worth a lot in such a crazy town.
Well, I'd say this is a perfect way to spend a Friday night.
Taking the silver medal of good is a character who falls into that same category. It's the ever soft-spoken Bruce. One of Family Guy's longest-running gag characters, Bruce is a gentle guy who's always there when the citizens of Quahog need a helping hand. The absolute worst anyone could say about Bruce is that he's a little promiscuous.
Straighten itself right out.
Oh, merciful heavens.
But that doesn't really take much away from his standing here, especially since he's such a sweet guy overall.
Yay!
From teaching a CPR course to volunteering at an orphanage to even helping exorcise spirits from the Griffin household.
Hey, let's talk to some spirits.
Bruce is among Family Guy's most consistently nice characters. Like Elle, he's a stand-up guy who always lightens the mood around him, making him one of the most pure-hearted citizens of Quahog. From one gay icon to another, the bronze medal of good goes to the criminally underused Jasper. He's Brian's gay cousin, always there when he needs a place to stay, an ear to listen, a shoulder to cry on. You name it, Jasper's there for it.
You know, there's been a lot of talk lately about homosexuals, but how do you know what to believe?
We can't say quite as much good about him as the characters above him, simply because there's not as much screen time for him as most of our other characters. In fact, Jasper's last significant role was all the way back in season 4, but hopefully he and Brian are still keeping in touch because he's proven to be a friend you can count on. Hey everybody, next up is Bernie the hamster. Would you like to be his friend? We sure would. He seems like a swell guy, even though he has only like 20 seconds of screen time in The Man with Two Brians. Still, aside from breaking into Peter's house, he seems like a great buddy to have. And Fox, if you're watching this, please give us an episode about him already.
Please, sir,
I want some more.
Next is war veteran Ida Quagmire, formerly Dan Quagmire. She's Glenn's father. Would that be mother now? Well, in any case, she's pretty great. The two have a very strong relationship. Ida is patient with Glenn and understanding of his struggle to get used to her transition. When Glenn refuses to accept Ida's relationship with Brian, she still chooses him, showing that she places her son above anyone else, as a parent should. Ida's also a strongly outspoken member of the trans community, willing to call out Peter in trans fat for transitioning just to use transgender restrooms. She does this not to talk down on him, but to show him the error of his ways and help him correct them.
Excuse me, ma'am. No porn at the bar.
Oh, it's okay. I'm transgender.
All around, she's a great person and one of Quahog's strongest proponents of justice.
My name is Cleveland Brown, and I am proud to be.
His name is Cleveland Brown, and he is proud to be. Up next. One thing you'll find us Family Guy fans almost universally agreeing on is that Cleveland is by far the best friend you can find on Spooner Street. Acting as the straight man of the series, Cleveland is always there for his friends when they need someone to listen to or support them. He's extremely protective of his family and would do anything for them, and unlike many other characters in the cast, he mostly kept his morals in check over the course of the series.
What the hell? No, 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 no!
What gives Cleveland such a high position on our list is just how darn forgiving he is. There's him forgiving Glenn for sleeping with his wife back in season 4, likely the most memorable example, but even in the season 21 episode Unzipped Code, he sacrifices his own job at the brewery to give Peter a chance at a promotion, even though Peter spent that whole episode trying to sabotage him out of jealousy. Cleveland's just about the best buddy you could ask for in Quahog, which keeps him in a generous top 5 spot. The only thing keeping him from being placed higher is that his passive people-pleasing tendencies can lead to him going along with Peter's schemes a little too often. This is how people pleasers die.
Apologize? I cheat on you and you apologize to me?
There was also that one episode where he rubbed his fling with Carolyn in Brian's face after she cheated with him, which was a pretty cruel move by his standards. Should have stopped your taxi for him, Brian. Now we have the one that got away, Brian's ex-girlfriend, Jillian. Have you ever kicked yourself for fumbling your dream girl? Just remember that you didn't screw things up as bad as Brian did with Jillian. She's a girl of very little brain, but thankfully, she more than makes up for that with her big heart.
Oh my god! I've never felt so stupid!
Really? Jillian is friendly with absolutely everyone. Heck, her relationship with Peter is the main thing that got him to push Brian to finally move in with her. She's gotten much less attention in recent years, but we're hoping she finds someone who treats her right. When you hear Mayor of Quahog, you probably think of a certain Batman actor the Noid would do well to avoid, but while he can never be truly replaced, Mayor Wild West isn't a bad substitute, all things considered. Voiced by Sam Elliott, Wild West is as eccentric as you'd expect from the cousin of Quahog's dearly departed mayor. The difference is that Wild West is actually pretty serious about protecting and leading the citizens of Quahog. He saves Elle from a burning library, and that's not to mention him generously forgiving Peter for sabotaging his campaign and starting that fire, gifting him a basket of baby mustaches.
All this and more on West's Wonders.
Why isn't he higher? Well, his running gag of asking people if they've killed a man. It definitely raises a few mustaches, to say the least. If there's any character who deserved more of a chance in this series, it was Vinny. When Brian tragically and temporarily died in the season 12 episode Life of Brian, Vinny was his replacement, a dog who gives off the vibe of a stereotypical Italian mobster.
Hey, don't get fresh with me, studio.
Despite this, Vinny is a good boy. He shows concern for Stewie's emotional state following Brian's death and even helps him bring Brian back with his time machine. Unfortunately, Vinny got barely any screen time, and he's hardly even been mentioned since Christmas Guy way back in season 12. But from what we saw, he retains his good dog status much better than his counterpart, especially since he was willing to give up his newfound home to reunite Stewie with Brian. Oh, and minus points for his mild racism. But really, no dog can hold a candle to Baby's true best friend, Rupert. Everyone had their comfort object as a kid, right? Well, sure, not all of them imagined them as an extremely buff man with a teddy bear's head, but we've all got our ways of life.
I have Stewie on one. He says he's been trying your cell.
Rupert may be inanimate, but he's stuck with Stewie through so much, from countless injuries to wild adventures to a concerning amount of weirdly suggestive scenarios.
I never knew there could be such a thing as a perfect day.
That we couldn't bear the idea of leaving him off our list. Next is a long-absent character from earlier seasons, Brian's therapist, Dr. Bruce Kaplan. Therapy is important, even for dogs, and alcoholics, who are also struggling with feelings for their best friend's wife. Look, the point is, Dr. Kaplan has his work cut out for him, and he's more than happy to embrace that duty to the best of his ability, if only Brian hadn't quit on him after season 3. That being said, a reunion between these two would sure be interesting. Take notes, Seth. Hopefully Kaplan has more animal clients lined up, like the Evil Monkey, for instance. Despite his name, Evil Monkey's far from from evil. Sure, he lives in the closet of a 13-year-old boy and threateningly points at him on a routine basis, but it turns out that he actually was never trying to scare him.
Chris, I'm sorry if I scared you before, but this is a great chance for us to start over.
The guy just wanted to make conversation, as revealed in the episode Hannah Banana. He even helps Chris and Peter mend their broken relationship, at least temporarily. And hey, if you found your wife and your best friend in bed together, you'd go bananas too, right? Time for another deep-cut early seasons character, Mr. Weed, owner of the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory. The first of surprisingly many deceased characters, Mr. Weed was Peter's boss for the first 2.5 seasons of Family Guy. Unfortunately, he's also by far the best boss he's had over the course of 21 seasons. He does come on a bit strong sometimes, and it's implied that he tends to have a more favorable view of handsome men when it comes to the workplace, but those things aside, he's a generally friendly man who does his best to keep things fair and balanced in the workplace.
I shall call you Eduardo.
It's a shame he had to go out so soon. Out of all the characters who have been killed off in this series, he certainly deserved it the least. Man, the gay reps in this series are really nice people though, huh? And side note, there are a lot of characters on this list. I don't know about you guys, but I could use a music break. Hit it!
It's been a long time, you're just as lovely.
Thanks, Twitty. Now let's roll right on to our next entry. Joe Swanson. This wheelchair-bound policeman is always ready to enforce justice in the city of Quahog. He's got some anger issues, as evidenced by one scene implying that he's beaten his son unconscious at least once.
And then another. And then everything got a little hazy. Kevin went to live with a foster family for a while.
And he can have a dangerous ego. While his self-worth has been greatly challenged in recent seasons, in the episode Believe It or Not, Joe's Walking on Air, we see Joe get a pair of working legs and become an absolute menace, abandoning his friends and becoming a massive jerk all around.
And all we got to remember him by are his old legs.
Joe's a good guy, and he's done a lot to protect Quahog from some shady characters, but he has more than enough sins to make his spot in the good section a pretty low one.
You boys have been very naughty.
He's a far cry from the original black friend of Peter's circle, but Jerome is still a pretty decent guy. He's much less soft-spoken and passive than Cleveland. In fact, he can be pretty vindictive.
What, you dating that guy? It's just a lot to take in.
Oh, yeah? You're telling me.
He refuses to let his daughter Pam see Chris due to him being white at first, and has no issue beating up Peter and company for destroying the bar and his only remaining picture of his mother, though it is kind of hard to blame him there. Still, Jerome has shown a decent amount of patience on other occasions, like forgiving Peter's poor treatment of him in his first major appearance.
We cool, Peter, we cool.
He's also willing to learn and grow as a person, since he does manage to overcome his prejudices against white people, ultimately letting Chris and Pam date if they really want to. This might be an odd choice, but we're placing resident punching/farting bag Meg Griffin next. Now to start things off, Meg definitely has some issues.
You're such a good listener. You're not like the other boys.
In one episode, her time in prison hardens her into a violent criminal who beats Connie and her friends with an entire bag of soda cans, not to mention the non-consensual tongue kiss. Speaking of which, in the episode Barely Legal, she kidnaps Brian and ties him up, probably planning to do something not even barely legal to him. That said, while Meg has some severe issues, we're giving her an honorary spot in the good territory for one simple reason. The fact that she's a decent person despite her horribly abusive family is nothing short of a miracle.
You don't know anything about me!
Who was that guy?
Meg is a pretty nice person, if a very unstable one, but she's also incredibly forgiving, seeing as how she's stayed loyal to her family and even saved Peter's life from his sister Karen despite the horrible bullying he puts her through. The fact that she has any compassion for this man is frankly incredible, and it's enough to bump her a lot higher than she'd be otherwise. And perhaps against our better judgment, it's only fair that next we rank Chris Griffin. Like Meg, he's got his issues. He can be extremely violent at times, has a concerning pornography addiction, has a pervy streak that would put a shonen comic relief character to shame, and definitely inherited that dumb and increasingly reckless gene from his old man.
No.
Him and Meg together can be extra trouble. Let's not forget the episode where they covered up Stewie's skull and brain being exposed so they wouldn't get into trouble. That said, along with being abused like Meg, if less so, Chris excels in one particular area: compassion. He isn't perfect, nor anywhere near it, but Chris is a genuinely sweet person whose worst moments usually will just come out of the abuse and manipulation he experiences from others. He's friendly with everyone around him and is willing to give up his own desires for the sake of others' happiness on a regular basis, like cruelly dumping Taylor Swift so she could write a successful breakup song about him, or pretending he didn't have a girlfriend so Peter would feel less bad about being a loser in his younger years.
I guess we're both a couple of fat losers, huh, Dad?
Chris also earns the Darwin Medal for various reasons, my personal favorite being the time he failed to shoot Guten Tag the Nazi because he couldn't tell him apart from Peter.
I know which one is the real dad!
We never switched. Wait, we don't even look the same.
If you plan to go out to sea anytime soon, you'd be wise to consult Seamus, lest you be consumed by Daggermouth. Little is known about the peg-appendaged pirate, and his handicap has even more origin stories than Joe's, who has way more screen time. But one thing's for sure, Seamus is a tough guy who is willing to warn others of any danger he sees in his outings, like telling Peter that no seafarer has ever faced Daggermouth and lived to tell the tale.
No, not you, Seamus.
Ah, poo.
Maybe one day we'll see Seamus in his adventuring days, but for now, X marks the next to last spot in the good tier for this pirate. Closing off this section is the one-time character, Pearl Burton. She appeared in Brian Wallows and Peter's Swallows, one of the most acclaimed and surprisingly heartfelt episodes of the entire series. She initially seems to be an extremely bitter old shut-in hiding from a world that refused to appreciate her passion for singing. She was instead only recognized for the commercial jingles she sang, but Brian shows his appreciation for her natural singing voice and allows her to see the world before she's tragically killed off.
Goodbye, Pearl.
This saved her from living a life that consisted of nothing but bitterness and spite, though there was still a lot of that stuff. Rest easy, Pearl. Here's hoping you're singing in heaven. Don't you worry, though. We've still got a lot to see ourselves. We now venture into the gray area.
I say, old chaps, isn't that Buzz Killington around the corner?
Stewie's not the only guy who can pull off a British accent.
Yes, I'm aware.
The difference? Well, Buzz Killington, as his name suggests, is that one guy who's way too boring to carry an engaging conversation with.
Evening, everyone. I thought it would be very droll if we all sat down and looked at etchings.
But simultaneously, too nice for you to say anything about it. Not sure what he gets up to outside of cutaway gags, but it's best to just nod along and try to enjoy hearing about the origins of cornmeal. Really, though, he hasn't shown up in a while. Hopefully he's doing okay. Somebody over in Great Britain check on him for us, alright? But do not invite him to your party, unless you want it to die right away. You might remember him as Tiger Woods, but up next is Cleveland Brown Jr. In the earlier seasons, Cleveland Jr. was Cleveland's hyperactive son. In the Cleveland show, however, he was given this sort of Diabito-esque redesign, or so you'd think, until it was revealed that he was actually killed by the newer, larger variant of Jr. Apparently, Cleveland somehow didn't question the sudden change because their relationship is pretty healthy. Jr. is a kind-hearted boy who loves his daddy, but he's also pretty unstable.
How you doing? Come on in.
In one episode, after Peter accidentally shoots him in the arm, Junior threatens him with revenge, leaving him to wonder whether or not it was a joke.
Hey, Mr. Griffin, I'm just kidding. Or am I? You're gonna wonder about that, you fat bitch.
Like Chris, he's a nice kid, but his stepbrother Rollo puts it best. Any day he doesn't snap and kill us all is a miracle. Next is manager of the Quahog Mini Mart, Carl. With the voice that anyone who's seen Bob's Burgers will find eerily familiar, Carl is a generally laid-back gas station store clerk. He enjoys discussing films with people and generally seems to be a decent guy, though on one occasion he does fire Meg for the simple fact that she objects to Chris being promoted before her, showing that he can be a little selfish when it comes to placing his own pleasure above doing what's right. Still, he's harmless and generally a nice dude.
I'd like to see that, because I can read it just like everybody else. And the charade continues.
Not much of a force for good nor evil at the end of the day. You're never gonna catch this next entry. Give it up for the greased up naked deaf guy. Little is known about this absolute living legend of Quahog. Why is he covered in grease? What is he running away from? Why is he deaf? Okay, the last one's kind of self-explanatory.
You're never gonna catch me.
But such a mysterious guy was made for the gray area. One thing's for sure though, you're never gonna catch him. Now why don't we drop by the Drunken Clam to visit Horace real quick. He's not the most complex character out there. Sure, he never gets very much focus and was eventually even killed off. That said, he fills that classic role of bartender who tends to his bar, making him a source of comfort for his patrons. He really was just there, but at the same time, he was there. That's gotta count for something. Also, in the honestly just there category is Peter's co-worker at the Pawtucket Brewery, Opie. There's very little to say about this guy, honestly. He only ever appears as a joke character in certain episodes. He seems to be a nice guy and does good work to the point where Angela actually favors him over Peter.
He is your superior.
But due to his, we'll call it limited vocabulary, we hesitate to put him any higher for lack of any real read on his character. Next, let's get our Blackie weather forecast from Ollie Williams. Known for his quick and blunt style of reporting with as few words as possible, Ollie is the weather reporter for Quahog Channel 5 News. Despite his loud voice, he's a pretty chill guy and a family man, though he does lose points for assaulting Peter during his paparazzi arc.
We now go live to Ollie Williams in the Channel 5 traffic counter. What's the scene, Ollie?
Everybody looks like
chance!
Probably because you're up so high.
We will say that we don't totally blame him there, though. That said, giving your son coal on Christmas isn't cool. Ollie, you're gonna lose some points for that. Up next is Meg's not-so-secret admirer, Neil Goldman. Neil is one of those somewhat nice but very creepy guys we all either knew in high school or were in high school, to varying degrees. To Neil's credit, he does have some standards. When Peter sells Meg to the Goldmans as a means of paying his debt at their pharmacy, Neil demonstrates some strong loyalty to her, refusing to cheat on her when Lois comes onto him in cosplay and ripping up the contract when he discovers Meg doesn't truly want to be with him.
Oh, don't be afraid of the fire, Meg. I won't let you burn.
Neil isn't a model citizen, though. He's willing to use others' generosity to his advantage, like the time he made merchandise of his and Meg's kiss, but on the whole, he's not a bad guy either. He's got plenty of time to grow past his more creepy tendencies. Time to spread some Christmas frustration, because up next is Santa.
Well, can you be a good boy?
Family Guy's version of Santa is a little different to the usual holly jolly saint American culture is used to. Due to the world's abundant gift expectations, Santa is completely exhausted, leading to him and his elves being extremely overworked. Honestly, despite his low placement here, we don't really have anything bad to say about Santa.
Do it. Please, put me out of my misery.
Yeah, he's working himself and his elves to the actual bone, but it's hard to blame him for his frustration given the crap he has to deal with year after year. Hopefully he's on the road to recovery now that Stewie and Brian have convinced the world to limit it to one gift per person. Also, Santa, maybe don't give a baby radioactive chemicals, or a predator a picture of his favorite target. Just a suggestion though. Well, two suggestions, but I think they're both good ones. Next up is Stewie's old acting rival, Olivia. Olivia and Stewie became an absolute hit with their performance of "Thank Goodness I've Got You." Though Olivia is egotistical and rather spiteful, she's also not an outright murderer like Stewie, so that's something. She is willing to sabotage his career, though, and always tries to steal the limelight from him whenever possible. In one episode, she even cheated on Stewie out of spite when they got married by official Minister Rupert. Side note, how did she survive having her house burned down? Speaking of toddler rivalries, next is a more recent one, Doug. No, not Chris's talking pimple. Stewie's big wheel sporting rival on Spooner Street. Never seen him? Yeah, most people haven't.
Hey, Stewie. Still sleeping in the slow lane?
While Doug is a jerk who's always trying to show Stewie up, his misdeeds come nowhere near other antagonists of the series, including our favorite maniacal baby himself, so we'll keep him near the middle. Good evening, Quahog. Tom Tucker is up next. The iconic host of Quahog Channel 5 News, Tom Tucker is a wisecracking host with a pretty dry sense of humor. He has a bit of a mean streak, often lacking compassion for the horrific events he reports on, and he has a lot of an ego, even if it's nothing compared to his former co-host, Diane.
I think I'll go get drunk and beat up some midgets. How about you, Diane?
Well, Tom, I just plain don't like black people.
He has his good traits, though. When he briefly dated Peter's mother in one episode, he treated her pretty well and even began to become a sort of father figure to Peter for a time. He also cares for his son Jake and tries to defend him from judgment for his facial disfigurement. Not a great guy, but not an awful one either.
Who's that, baby?
Hello, this is Tom Tucker.
At least he's willing to answer the hard questions in life, like whether or not Nicki Minaj is a bear. I wouldn't have known. Hide your expired coupons, people. Next up is Ernie, the giant chicken. That's right, the giant chicken. The one who gave Peter an expired coupon on that fateful day and since then has been causing property damage all over the place with their on-site death matches.
My God, look at all this devastation. What the hell happened?
To Ernie's credit, he seems a bit more stable of a person than Peter, even attempting to be cordial with him on occasion, but he also cheats on his wife to try and get with Lois. Yeah, maybe he's better than Peter, but as we'll see later, that isn't exactly the most impressive feat on the planet. Fun fact, we're barely even halfway through all the characters we're discussing today, and we've already reached Death. The literal Grim Reaper is not even in the bottom half of our list. That's the type of cast we're dealing with. But to his credit, Death's really just doing his job. Yeah, taking souls to the underworld isn't the most pleasant job in the world, but someone has to do it. Plus, Death isn't all bad. He actually helps Peter improve his life on multiple occasions, from saving his marriage with Lois to showing him the dangers of his alcoholic lifestyle. He actually displays some impressive patience with the big guy.
Peter, it's okay. It's just Death.
Oh, thank God.
Though there's also his willingness to kill someone just for being a bad conversationalist.
Check, please.
So the gray area is definitely the proper spot for this guy, yeah. Staying on the topic of death, next up is Vern. Fans of the earlier seasons of the series might remember Vern as the guy who showed up before some commercial breaks to talk really fast about whatever was going on, connecting it to Vaudeville's death and, of course, connecting it to his act as a tumbler. This is always followed up by him being played off by his buddy Johnny. Why is he in the gray area, though, you ask? Well, aside from him being pretty darn nosy, he was also close friends with Johnny, who he himself asserts is in hell because he likes little boys. It's uncertain whether or not Vern actually knew this before their demise at the hands of Stewie, but it's still worth questioning. There's a bit less room for debate debate, though, when it comes to Mr. Herbert's dog, Jesse. He's not exactly the most prominent character in the show, but the fact that he's willing to along with Herbert shows that he's got at least some idea of what direction his owner's tastes go in. Still, he seems like a pretty chill dog for the most part, and even helps get Chris and Peter out of the basement when Gutentag traps them there. From Quahog to Stoolbend, then back to Quahog. Next up is Donna Tubbs. Ignoring the absolute character assassination Cleveland experienced in his spin-off, he at least got his own family out of it. Donna is his wife, and the two have a relationship somewhat similar to Peter and Lois's, but, you know, a lot healthier.
Donna, guess what's wearing my watch?
Hope it's waterproof.
At times, they're even seen as the good family in contrast to the Griffins in later seasons. She can be overly controlling, like refusing to let Cleveland and Peter see each other just because she and Lois don't get along. But on the whole, she's a sincerely caring wife and mother who will do anything to protect her family. If nothing else, a step up from Cleveland's last marriage. Standing here with us next is Asian reporter Trixia Takanawa. Trixia is one of those characters who falls into the enough of a jerk to notice, but not enough of one to label as outright bad category.
Sir, how does it feel to have the lake back?
Well, I tell you, Tricia, as a local resident, I feel
She gets by far the most focus in the one episode, Tricia and Carter, where she takes advantage of Carter's feelings for her to expose his unethical business practices. While this was ultimately a good thing, and we aren't exactly gonna feel sorry for Carter very easily, it still showed that Tricia is willing to use some underhanded methods to get a good story.
Watch as I have sex with this potentially dangerous man as we take you in-depth and undercover.
But we feel sympathetic to her. She does have a hard time desperately wanting her mother's approval, so her mean-spirited tendencies are really all she knows.
What happy? You know what for Channel 10, just Channel 5, only half as good.
It's not an excuse, per se, but it's enough for us to hold her in decent enough regard. Resident pharmacist / Jewish stereotype, Mort Goldman, is up next. In the first couple seasons, Mort was seen solely as an overly polite, albeit socially awkward, Jewish man. He might tow someone's car out of spite or expose their very bad hemorrhoids to a classroom full of middle schoolers, but there's not much malicious about him. His worst trait is definitely how darn greedy he can be. Not only do he and his wife, Muriel, rest in peace, scam their customers on a regular basis, they do it proudly. His bad traits aren't too terrible, but his good ones aren't too good, and that leaves him at a pretty neutral position on our list.
Oh God, an angry mob! I've got to swallow all my valuables and get out of here!
Oh, yeah, and there was also his willingness to accept Peter's proposition of his teenage daughter being an unwilling girlfriend to his son.
What do you think of that, Neil? Daddy bought you a girlfriend.
That's also kind of messed up. Honorable mention to Muriel. She was, they were married.
Oh, yeah!
The Kool-Aid Man is up next. One of Family Guy's oldest running gags, dating all the way back to the pilot.
Oh, yeah!
Kool-Aid Man is a penchant for busting through walls anytime a group of people says, "Oh no!" multiple times. The thing about Kool-Aid Man is that he isn't really malicious per se. If anything, he's an addict suffering from an addiction to mass collateral damage.
Oh, Jeffrey.
Oh, no.
He's also managed to overcome his parents' prejudice and dated a bottle of Yoo-Hoo at one point, showing that he's not a racist, which is always worth some points, or at least not worth taking points off. Grab your lemon pledge, because it's time to clean up Consuela's act next. This Hispanic cleaning lady is one of Family Guy's most memorable gag characters, showing up every so often to clean up wherever Quahog needs her help. That said, she's extremely stubborn, refusing to take no for an answer even when Peter offers her money to get her to leave. She just takes the money and keeps on cleaning anyway.
Can you just give him this flyer?
No, I have no money.
The episode Stewie Goes for a Drive showcases her best and worst traits. She's altruistic enough to take Stewie in when he's lost, but when Brian comes to retrieve him, she refuses, effectively kidnapping a literal infant and losing a lot of morality points. But hey, at least she didn't leave the poor little guy out there by himself. Next up is a character we've decided to show a little more mercy for this time around, Kevin Swanson. Bonnie and Joe's son, Kevin was thought to be deceased in Iraq after a long time absence from the series. That is, until his return in Thanksgiving, where it's revealed that he's actually alive and faked his death in Iraq out of disgust at what his country was doing to the Middle East.
And then we dug the bullets out of that Iraqi family's skulls so they couldn't be traced back to us.
Today I saw a balloon.
This sentiment is totally valid on its own. What isn't valid is abandoning his fellow soldiers completely. It's hard to blame Kevin given the horrors he witnessed and the hopelessness he felt. As for why he's not any lower,
Spend every holiday with your family.
Shut up! I'm a full-size person. I make the decisions.
well, Kevin isn't malicious. He's actually a generally decent person despite his misdeeds. He's just become extremely reckless and suicidal. He's not a villain, but a deeply disturbed man who genuinely needs help. Next, let's give it up for the OG mayor of Quahog, Mayor Adam West.
My God, I'm a tomato.
He's the actual, he's the embodiment of pure chaos. When Mayor West is on screen, you know you're not going to be able to predict what's going to happen next. He's killed several people on screen, including Domino's the Noid for attempting to ruin his pizza, and an innocent fisherman to make sure his proposal to Carol would be unforgettable. He also campaigned against gay marriage in one episode and tends to use the town's tax dollars to his own ends.
This press conference is over. I can't see you now. I can't hear you now. You're not here now.
He also dated Meg in one episode, which, ew, not even an ew Meg joke. It's a teenager, sir. He would fall lower, but this man is he's legitimately insane, and we don't have the heart to call good old Mayor West a true bad guy. He did, after all, commemorate brave soldiers with a beautiful golden statue of Diggum the Sugar Smacks frog. So surely he can't be all bad. Insane, reckless, and a literal murderer, but anything but malicious. That said, it's dig them. Rounding out the gray area, and believe me, he was hard to place, is Stewie Griffin. He's an icon for sure. His flamboyant sense of humor is a great mood lightener, and he's one of the most consistently fun and lovable characters in the show.
Brian, this feels weird.
Hit the button.
Further still, Stewie can be genuinely nice sometimes. He cares a lot for his family, particularly Brian and Chris. Stewie has a surprisingly sweet brotherly bond with Chris and often helps him out, like the time he encouraged him to get a date with his Down syndrome girl. Stewie's a good friend to have, too. He's saved Brian from many an existential crisis and has shown willingness to protect his family when need be, even if it's mainly for his own benefit. On one occasion, he's even gone from trying to destroy the world to saving it, like the time he tried to kill Santa but ended up instead encouraging the world to stop being so dang greedy with their Christmas lists so that Santa wouldn't be so overworked. He even cares for his teddy bear Rupert, straight up murdering new Brian for assaulting him. We don't blame you either, Stewie. That said though, Stewie is not innocent.
I used to be innocent like you. I've killed people. Then I lost my virginity at 6.
He's plotted to murder his own mom, killed multiple innocent people, once impregnated himself with Brian's DNA. By the way, no, that episode isn't worth the watch.
How dare you!
He can also be incredibly cruel, like when he brutally beat up Brian for not paying back the money he borrowed right away. All of this is pretty awful, and redeemed only by the fact that Stewie is a baby who seems to be trying to figure out who he wants to be. There are times when he reverts to that infantile state temporarily, and what's more is that in the 2-part special where he meets his future self, he seems like a decent enough guy, so there's hope that Stewie will turn out just fine, regardless of his current homicidal, matricidal tendencies.
Ugh, yuck.
And that's, albeit barely, enough to keep him out of our final tier. This is the bad to evil. First up is classic high school bully Connie Dionisio, a cruel, mean girl stereotype you've seen 1,000 times before, whether you're talking on screen or in school. If you've ever met a mean, popular girl, you've met Connie.
Hey there, sweetie. How old are you?
16.
18. You're first.
There really isn't all that much to say about her. While she's implied to have a rough home life and occasionally shows some redemptive qualities, like when she's open-minded about dating Chris because of how sincere he is, Connie's still a bully at her core. She doesn't have any particularly redeeming character traits, but she doesn't really come across as heinous enough to place any lower either. She's not evil, just really mean. From a bully to a victim of bullying turned into a bully, next is Diane's replacement, Joyce Kinney. Being bullied sucks, but does it really justify you becoming a bully yourself? If you ask Joyce Kinney, yes it does.
Tom, I think I speak for all of us here at Channel 5 News when I say it's good to have you back here at half your original salary.
In order to get revenge on Lois for a cruel, humiliating high school prank, Joyce Kinney decides to humiliate her on live television, shaming her to the entirety of town for her racy past as a porn star. Now, we'll say this much. We get it. Being humiliated that cruelly in front of your entire school is deeply traumatizing, but repeating the cycle doesn't make you any better, especially as a full-grown adult. While we feel for her quite sincerely, we can't exactly excuse her cruel revenge scheme, especially since the two sincerely became friends in their adult years. As much as we'd like to place her higher, next up is Loretta Brown. Cleveland's unfaithful ex-wife is one of Family Guy's least beloved characters, and with good reason.
Cleveland!
Aside from generally not being funny, she's also cheated on Cleveland in season 4 with Glenn.
You name the time and the place, little Nick.
Her reasoning was that Cleveland was spineless, which, although valid, it should go without saying that it's no justification for betraying a committed lover.
I need a real man, and Lord knows that ain't you.
That said, she does show some sincere remorse later on. In Love, Black Shuli, she meets up with Cleveland in an effort to win him back, during which Quagmire tempts her into adultery. This time she refuses though, showing that she's actually repented of her actions and wants to get back with Cleveland. While it's not quite convincing enough to rank her any higher, at least she found a little bit of redemption eventually. Next, let's talk about Peter's other deceased boss, Angela. Angela's only good trait might just be the fact that she's voiced by the late Carrie Fisher, but other than that, most of what we have of Angela is her being your typical crotchety boss. There's one episode that cements her placement in the bad section. In Peter-assment, she harasses Peter in the workplace and successfully manipulates Peter into believing she's suicidal, planning to kill herself if he doesn't sleep with her.
Shh, don't talk, just breathe. It turns me on.
We get it. Loneliness can really do stuff to people. I mean, look at me. But that's never a justification for hurting others. Still, she has some level of morals. When Peter accidentally blows up a children's hospital in Tales of a Third Grade Nothing, for instance, Angela makes sure he faces legal action for it. She's more of a broken jerk than an outright supervillain, so she doesn't belong any lower, at least.
That felt so good.
All I want to do is please you, Griffin.
Now let's turn to the Griffin family, but not to the one you're thinking of. We're talking Thelma Griffin. Peter's mother was foreshadowed as not being the greatest parental figure early on. In one iconic cutaway gag from season 1, Peter recalls his mother using whiskey whenever he had a toothache by chucking the entire bottle at him.
I don't see what the problem is.
So we know from just this one small scene that she's both an abusive mother and an alcoholic. There's also the fact that she kept Peter's Mexican birthplace a secret from him for most of his life. Even with all that in mind though, she was still the better half of her former spouse, Francis Griffin. Francis Griffin might just be the simplest character in this whole section. To put it simply, he's just a flat-out jerk. Francis is a religious zealot, but not even the debatably good kind. He's the type who will relentlessly browbeat others with the Bible, refusing to give any leeway to them and enforcing his legalistic ways on everyone around him. While he claims to love Peter, his idea of love is not lining up with ours, nor Jesus's. Next we have someone to care for, maybe even be there for. That's right, we have James Woods.
Well.
Someone to do for, muddle through for. You have James Woods. Okay, right. We have to talk about him. Well, while he might be a good friend in moderation, he also goes full on yandere if he doesn't have your full attention.
Get out of my house right now, son of a... Yeah.
From identity theft to attempted murder, nothing stops James Woods once he's on the path of vengeance. Unless you've got a trail of Reese's Pieces, that is.
Belongs to Peter Griffin, and that's me.
Driver's license, social
Unlike many villains, James Woods does redeem himself somewhat, inviting everyone he's wronged to his mansion in And Then There Were Fewer, in a sincere effort to reconcile with them due to his newfound faith. If he'd had more time, we'd give him a more flattering spot, but even so, finding some redemption is worth something, at least. Whoa, jackass ahoy! We now approach Brian Griffin. Of the 3 adults of the Griffin family, we'll give Brian this. While he's been no less corrupted by the later seasons, he's easily the most compassionate of the 3.
How do you do it? What's your process?
Oh, God, Allison, how do I even answer that?
Brian was once the voice of reason for the Griffins, acting as Peter's conscience and slowly growing into his own character. Unfortunately, as time went on, he slowly devolved from an aspiring writer trying to find himself into a pretentious douchebag who mistreats his partners, will do absolutely anything to get laid, no matter how morally depraved.
Oh, you know cancer?
Oh my God, I thought I smelled cancer.
Still want to go back to my place?
Sounds great.
And will also give a baby herpes for the sole reason that he doesn't want to admit that he has herpes. Yeah, really. Actually, can we talk about that last one? There's a whole episode of this show where the plot is literally Brian gives a baby herpes. Just let that sink in. Tack on his various charges of grooming and not the usual dog kind, assault, and general douchebaggery, and his kinder earlier season's variant can't save him from a low spot. Shame. I mean, honestly, he really used to be a good boy. Oh yeah, and he's also a racist, apparently.
I should really pick up that milk now before I forget.
Cleveland really put it best. Now we're getting into the real bad guys of Quahog, starting with Babs Pewterschmidt. While she is far less evil than her spouse, don't go thinking that makes Babs innocent. Babs is willing to leave Carter the moment he's down on his luck. When he loses his fortune, she leaves him immediately for another man, only to come crawling back once he gets his fortune back.
Honey, we're rich again. I divorced Ted Turner and took half his money.
She also had an affair during their marriage, traumatizing their son Patrick to the point where she and Carter place him into an institution and forget about him. Heck, Lois didn't even know he existed until adulthood. The one thing saving Babs from a lower spot is the fact that she's clearly very mistreated by Carter.
Well, it's not real fur. It's actually made from bald eagle.
Which has likely affected her mental health on many levels. It's not enough to redeem her, but enough to make us sympathize with her a little bit. Oh, also, in the season 21 episode, Adoptation, Carter reveals that Babs once tried to put Lois in the oven as a baby. Yeah, that was when we knew to put her down here. The doctor is in. Up next is Dr. Hartman.
I think I can hear the ocean. Smell it, too.
Quahog's aggressively careless doctor. He's the last one you'd want anywhere near you or your loved ones when you need some health care. While it could be said that Hartman means well, to an extent, the amount of harm and even death he's caused to his patients is too much to ignore, especially since he treats it as little more than a slight inconvenience.
My goodness, you'll be dead within a month.
What?
Oh, Hagar the
He does have some moments of kindness, though, like his willingness to donate his kidney to Peter, even if that was mainly because he couldn't afford to lose him as a patient. At least he's not particularly malicious, though, which keeps him from falling any lower. Now then, play us off, Johnny. To reiterate from earlier, he liked little boys. I feel like that sums it up pretty nicely. He does play a nice piano riff, though, but now whatever. Now it's time to finally talk about Peter's barely better half, Lois Griffin.
Let me finish the story, fellas. You don't want to be up all night. Or do you?
Like much of the series' ensemble cast, Lois fell off in terms of morals, and she fell off hard. For one thing, her marriage with Peter is in absolute shambles. While you might default to blaming Peter himself for this, which is far from unreasonable, would you believe us if we said that Lois cheated on Peter before there was any unfaithfulness on his end? With Bill Clinton, of all people, slowly but surely their marriage deteriorated to the point where they hardly even love each other. In Turban Cowboy, Lois says that if Peter cried while being held hostage by terrorists, she'd dump him. That's not even mentioning how she treats her children, showing minimal concern for them and treating every aspect of parenting as nothing more than a burden.
Mom, I forgot my keys. Do you know where?
Lois is also extremely petty and will go to absolutely any length to get back at anyone who does her wrong, or even just opposes her when she's wrong. Lois may be the glue that holds her family together, and at the end of the day, she does seem to love them to some degree, but she's still fallen pretty far in terms of morality. Next is Lois's long-lost brother, Patrick Pewterschmidt. Trauma really does stuff to your head, and boy does Patrick know this all too well.
Beat it, kid, your mother's busy.
Due to witnessing his mother's affair, Patrick went on a killing spree of every fat person he saw, hence being dubbed the Fat Guy Strangler. He gladly uses Lois to get himself broken out of jail to continue his killing spree, and while he gets a few points for helping track down the killer of Chris's fat camp bunkmates later on, he immediately loses said points when he runs off to presumably continue his favorite hobby of you know what. He's only saved from a lower spot by his insanity plea.
Great. Bye, honey.
Now for the moment we've all been waiting for. It's time to finally talk about the Family Guy himself, Peter Griffin. In the first few seasons, Peter was an endearingly ignorant dad who sincerely meant well despite the trouble he caused. From his lovable anti-pollution mascot, Gary the no-trash cougar, to his spree of bullying Lois for the sake of bonding with baby Stewie, there's little room for denying that early seasons Peter is one of the most endearing cartoon characters of all time.
And I don't think you're an addict. I think you're an idiot.
Well, I don't pay you to think, Hot Lip.
Unfortunately, that changed a lot. What was once a well-intentioned dummy with a heart of gold has devolved into a completely depraved psychopath with no regard for the well-being of others.
Jerky boys. Oh, that was awesome. Hey, who else has a dead wife?
Though, admittedly, he's still pretty funny. We've done a whole video covering the worst things Peter's done, but just to give you an idea, he's killed at least 39 people by his own admission to Mayor Wild West, has cheated on Lois multiple times, bullies his own children regularly, often injures and even shoots others for the sheer fun of it. Basically, Peter slowly devolved from a chaotic good character to pure chaotic evil. But under the surface, he's actually actually worse than most people realize. In the episode He's Black from season 12, it's revealed that Peter has a giant collection of child porn. When Cleveland discovers this in one of their schemes to get Lois and Donna to reapprove their friendship,
Peter, these are hundreds of naked babies in suggestive situations. I need help.
In season 21, we find out that Lois is only staying with Peter because he threatens to kill himself if she leaves him. Peter is an absolute menace to society with very few redeeming qualities. The only thing that keeps him from falling even lower is that he does still display some hints of goodwill here and there. He's a lot nicer to Meg lately than he has been in years, and it still seems like at the very end of the day, he's a loyal family guy. But all of that does very little to heighten our ranking for him. One thing's for sure though, we sure miss your Lando Griffin days. But if we're being honest, Peter's descent into moral depravity is nothing compared to that of Bonnie Swanson. Joe's wife, Bonnie was originally one of the most kind and gentle souls in Quahog. She stuck by Joe through thick and thin, supporting him through his paralysis and being a good friend to her Quahog neighbors. Later on, she slowly began to tire of her now loveless marriage, no longer feeling any true passion for her husband.
Would you like to sample a warm French baguette?
Oh my.
She's had multiple affairs, including with other wheelchair-bound men, and it's gotten so bad to the point that Joe doesn't even care anymore. He just kind of accepts it.
No, it's okay. I promise you it's okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
It's okay, Peter.
All of this wouldn't be enough to put Bonnie quite this low if it weren't for the fact that she's been shown planning to kill Joe on multiple occasions. Not to mention the fact that she'll turn on Lois, supposedly her close friend, if it's the popular thing to do at the moment.
Ha! Slut!
Among other things, it's incredibly cruel for Bonnie to not just divorce Joe at this point. The love is clearly gone. Adam West High School's Principal Shepard is up next. Shepard might not have as long a list of crimes as the Fat Man, but they do have similar interests in one very nasty area. That's right, whereas Peter at least acknowledged he needed help with his EDP-esque urges, Principal Shepard is revealed to have nude pictures of his students saved on his phone. His underage students.
Oh my god, Principal Shepard's making porn at school!
He's willing to use these pictures to straight up bribe people, and sees absolutely no issue with that.
First of all, I don't care what the courts say. Let's thank the Christian God together.
Add on to that his willingness to bribe, drink, and drive, and no particularly redeeming qualities to speak of, and you've got a total scumbag who's earned a low spot on our list.
And again, we cannot show you the nude photos the Spanish teacher sent to that kid.
Next up, who else could it be but Glenn Quagmire? While many find him hilarious at times, us included, the guy whose whole shtick is, being a predator, has to rank in this category. From kidnapping to murder to multiple counts of groping, assault, grooming, and even necrophilia, Glenn Quagmire is one major scumbag.
Dear Diary, jackpot.
That said, he does have one attribute we can't attribute to almost anyone else. He's actually mellowed out in later seasons. Yeah, he's still a sex-crazed maniac, but he's a sex-crazed maniac who seems to have a bit of a moral compass.
This is gonna be a great weekend.
Or at least to do something in the world that isn't just related to sex. Quagmire's just some guy now. While that's nowhere near enough to make up for years of his past sins, trying to clean up his act, even just a little bit, is enough to keep him from falling any lower. Former co-host of Quahog's Channel 5 News, we now have Diane Simmons. One of many recurring characters to be killed off in And Then There Were Fewer, Diane was the mastermind behind the murders at James Woods' mansion. She kills several innocent people in her quest to simultaneously get back at James Woods and become the only news anchor on Channel 5, framing Tom Tucker for the killings. She ultimately gets caught thanks to Lois's observation, but is taken out by Stewie. Still, the fact that Diane did this with absolutely zero remorse shows that she was way more dangerous than she let on. It's also worth noting that she was kind of a jerk in general, not to mention openly racist.
Well, Tom, I just plain don't like black people.
Next, we have a spot reserved for Stewie's friendly rival turned menace, Bertram. Despite only appearing in 3 episodes, Bertram made quite an impact. Initially, he was Stewie's greatest rival yet, a would-be baby he had to take out so his status as the family baby wouldn't be usurped. Eventually, Bertram was born and respected the pact that he and Stewie made to be sibling rivals. Nah, I'm just kidding. He's just kind of a jerk. What cements his position near the evil end of our list is his third and final episode, The Big Bang Theory, in which he travels back in time to kill Leonardo da Vinci, who happens to be Stewie's ancestor. He does this to keep Stewie from being born, obviously, but when he finds out that doing this would also result in the universe never being created, he just doesn't care? This baby man was so spiteful that he was willing to kill Stewie even if it meant destroying the entire universe.
Worth it!
Can you even simply call it spite at that point? He doesn't have a reason for it. He just really hates Stewie, and that only makes us regard him as even more of an agent of evil, as well as a pretty clear-cut choice for the Wrath Center medal. Just outside of our top 3 baddies is the arguable main villain of the whole series, Carter Pewterschmidt. We've already mentioned in past entries that Carter is a serial cheater and an extremely abusive, greedy man. He's the type of guy who will trick an orphan into thinking he's being adopted just to speed away at the last second.
Okay, I guess you don't want a new family, toys, and a puppy.
Oh, yeah, and there's also the tiny detail of him hiding the literal cure to cancer just to keep more money rolling into his already fattened pockets, which, by the way, gives him a very easy Greed to Center medal.
Oh, fantastic. What the hell was that for?
Now we have the pot and the money.
There's his immense hatred for Peter, his lack of concern for Babs being institutionalized multiple times over different affairs, etc., etc. Carter is a monster, and considering he's more mentally stable than our bottom 3 by far, we really wish we could honestly give him the top spot, but in season 21, he actually showed some genuine remorse in the episode Adoptation, where he adopts a little girl in an effort to at least somewhat make up for his failure at being a good dad to Lois. He shows sincere regret for not being able to go back and make it up to her. It doesn't take away from the atrocities he's committed over the years, but having some desire to better himself even a little bit puts him above the remaining few. Not quite somewhere that's green, but somewhere that's bronze. Herbert the Pervert is the first entry on our podium of evil.
Holy moly, it must be my birthday.
He's one of the most hilarious gag characters in the show, but his position here shouldn't need any explanation. Herbert's character analysis is that he's a child predator. He's constantly scheming to kidnap preteen boys, from trying to lure them to his basement, to stalking them, to repeatedly breaking into Chris's room.
Hello there, Kyle. You look nice today. I see you wearing your big shorts.
The man is an absolutely vile predator, and he's smart too. That's the scary part. In one episode, he finds a mattress with malfunctioning child-shaped robots on it, only to immediately deduce that it must be a trap. He's able to use reverse psychology to get orphans to find the extra money strapped to his thigh.
I hope you don't find the money strapped to my thigh.
Showing that he's deceptive as well as calculating. Oh, and that's not even mentioning his shocking hidden strength. He once effortlessly rescued Chris from a house fire without his walker, and defended him from a giant haunted tree that was about to kill him. That there's his man. Actually, not at all. But there is a very strong case for him taking the top spot. In fact, we did put him there in our first Family Guy Good to Evil video. Herbert doesn't really have any wholly redeeming qualities either, while he does show some compassion here and there.
Don't let me catch you, because I'll just wrap you up and eat you later.
Like rescuing Chris and Peter in German Guy and helping set his niece Sandy up with Chris on Valentine's Day. Even these moments are underlaid, though, by his desire to get with little boys, especially Chris. Sorry, Quagmire, but we're gonna give Herbert the Lust Center medal. At least Glenn's tastes don't run in that direction. He's a vile predator and way more of a threat than he lets on, though we'll admit he at least has a concerningly good singing voice.
YMCA.
The Silver Medal of Evil goes to Penelope. Stewie was a pretty maniacal dude in his early years, but it was always balanced out with either flamboyance or an ultimate goal of world domination. Penelope is basically all of Stewie's evil, brilliant early seasons traits without any of the good ones he'd develop later on. She and Stewie take to causing nuclear wars and killing people on a regular basis just for fun. Stewie, having at least some semblance of a soul, gets bored of it, which leads to the reason we give Penelope a much lower spot. She not only knows exactly what she's doing, and in contrast to Stewie, she doesn't have any baby-esque characteristics, but on top of all this, her motivation isn't world domination. It's, as Brian puts it, chaos for the sake of chaos.
Maybe we don't have to kill someone every day. There are other things to do.
Like what?
Penelope sees absolutely no reason to do anything that doesn't cause wars, death, destruction, or just some type of pain to others. She may not be as flashy as Herbert nor Carter, but Penelope lacks any redeeming characteristics, and one can only wonder what she's up to now. Bertram was a bad kid, but even he's an absolute saint next to Penelope. Surely nobody could be even worse than her, right? Surely at least not another toddler, right? Think again. We're giving the Gold Medal of Evil to the only character it really could go to, Evil Stewie. No, not seasons 1 to 3-ish evil Stewie. In the season 9 episode, The Hand That Rocks the Wheelchair, Stewie makes a clone of himself to fight back against the going soft allegations. This clone is a manifestation of all of Stewie's evil ambitions without any of his good traits. Except we said that about Penelope too, right? Well, okay, yeah. Penelope didn't really have any redeeming qualities, but she still somehow seems kinda saintly in comparison. Evil Stewie literally insists on killing people in the most brutal, painful ways possible. He tries to strangle Brian, choke him with his own tail that he just cut off, tries to kill Stewie himself, dismembers and bleeds out the Kool-Aid Man, rips an innocent woman in half, and in a deleted scene, noogies a playground bully to death off screen. I don't think we need to go into detail of why that's incredibly sadistic. As for why he's higher than Penelope, well, while Penelope was irredeemably evil, she at least seemed to be doing it for fun. Evil Stewie just soullessly enjoys causing as much pain and suffering as possible to everyone around him, seeing nobody as a friend or an enemy, just voodoo dolls to destroy in the most gruesome ways he can. It really makes you appreciate the real Stewie a lot more, huh? This guy wouldn't be caught dead having a sexy party. I don't even want to know what he'd do to those poor girls. Family Guy's been going strong since 1999, and throughout that time, plenty of characters have come and gone, but one of the most iconic characters outside of the Griffin family is good old Glenn Quagmire. Local pervert, comical sex offender, dog hater, and pilot, Quagmire is a character many people love and despise. And one thing is for sure, Quagmire has had a lot of strange relationships, many of which go well past our usual healthy to toxic criteria. I'm Keefinosi with Wicked Binge, and this is Glenn Quagmire relationships, healthy to toxic to disturbing. First off, we'll be discussing different types of relationships, not simply the romantic or intimate ones. Secondly, as the title suggests, Glenn has very few healthy relationships, and toxic is not really a way we describe most of his relationships on this list. So we'll be skipping the gray area altogether. So in a way, toxic is kind of Quagmire's average, where the furthest end of our spectrum will be reserved for his relationships that are downright dark, disgusting, or illegal. So just a heads up, in case anyone is uncomfortable with the discussion of those things. There aren't very many, but we're starting out by talking about our best relationships. These are the healthy. Taking our gold medal of health is Quagmire and Brenda. Brenda is Quagmire's younger sister who's appeared in a couple episodes. Initially in the season 8 episode, Jerome is the New Black. In this episode, she comes to stay at Glenn's house because she's being beaten by her fiancé Jeff. Quagmire clearly cares for his younger sister and will do just about anything for her, such as in the entirety of Season 10's Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q. In this episode, which is Brenda's most major appearance, we see the full extent of Jeff's abuse. Quagmire tries his hardest to solve this problem in a peaceful way, trying to convince Brenda to leave him. This doesn't work, so Quagmire jumps to murdering Jeff to save his sister. It's no surprise they rank here, although it may be odd to start out our healthy section with a relationship that resulted in murder, but it's Family Guy, and there aren't many people you'd murder another man for, so they definitely have to take gold. Earning our silver medal of health is the relationship between Quagmire and Cheryl Tiegs. Cheryl Tiegs makes up one of Quagmire's first relationships and his first celebrity crush. As early as Season 3's Mission Impossible, we can see this because Glenn has a poster of Tiegs in his home. In Season 4's The Perfect Castaway, Glenn even mentions that if he were blind, every woman who he slept with would be Tiegs.
Yeah, and every woman I did would be Cheryl Tiegs.
The Season 8 episode, Jerome is the New Black, reveals the full extent of their relationship because they were in a happy, serious relationship when Glenn was young. The two broke up because of that damn James Woods, which apparently led to the perverted man that Glenn had become, due to feeling emptiness in his soul. This is used against him later by Brian, who starts dating Cheryl Tiegs just to mess with him. This is no doubt one of his healthiest relationships, and it's sad that this relationship failing is what led Glenn to become the man that he is. Our bronze medal of health goes to Quagmire and Ida. Ida's first appearance in the Season 8 episode, Quagmire's Dad, is where she comes to Quahog to be honored for her military service. This is also when she gets her sex change to become a her and fully embraces her true self. Quagmire is initially grossed out and against this, but after a while he manages to accept her and love her once more. Ida does embarrass Quagmire at times, talking about her operation or when she was sleeping with Brian, but she tries her hardest to be by Glenn's side, and he tries his best as well. Later episodes, such as Season 12's Quagmire's Quagmire, show that she will go to the ends of the earth to find her son, and Season 16's The Unkindest Cut ends with Ida giving Glenn her old, equipment after Glenn gets his bitten off by a shark. Next up on our list is the relationship between Quagmire and the guys. Quagmire has been friends with Peter and Cleveland for a long time and became quick friends with Joe since his first appearance. Ever since then, this group has done many things. Even after Cleveland left the group for his own show, they care about each other, such as in Season 13's episode #JLo, where they stop Joe from jumping off of Niagara Falls because they care about him that much. Sure, they're great friends. They drink together all the time and have been since Season 1. Some episodes, such as Season 10's Forget-Me-Not, show that they would still be friends with amnesia, showing that they really are good friends. But there are also plenty of episodes where the exact opposite is also true. They fight a lot, which is kind of the reason they don't grab a medal here. Episodes like Season 12's Brian's Bad Dad has Peter and Quagmire shooting each other. Season 16's Fox in the Men House has Peter abandon them because he found somebody cooler. And the Season 15 episode Passenger Fatty 7 is all about Quagmire's friends thinking less of Quagmire because of the autopilot feature. But while they fight, they always stick together in the end, meaning they definitely deserve to be in the healthy section at least. Next up on our list is Quagmire and Anna Lee. In the Season 8 episode Quagmire's Baby, we're introduced to Anna Lee, the titular baby. She was left on Quagmire's doorstep during a garage sale he had by one of Glenn's one-night stands. He tries his best to be a good dad to the young girl, but it shows to not be a very easy situation for him, especially since she continually interrupts any of his romps. Now, he initially gives her up to the foster care system because of the aforementioned interruptions, but he regrets this decision. He even tries to get her back, but realizes she's happy with her new family, so he doesn't get in the way of that happiness. Up next on our list is Quagmire and Sujin. Sujin appears in the Season 14 episode Candy Quahog Marshmallow. It turns out that she and Quagmire had dated long ago when he was in Korea as part of a romantic soap opera. The two fell in love while working on the show, and they seemed to be quite loving, especially compared to some of Quagmire's other relationships, as he isn't just using her for relief. He was even willing to throw away his old life to live with her and her cats, showing he really cared for her. Obviously, this doesn't work out because Glenn finds out that her entire family would be living in close quarters to them, and he doesn't want to deal with that. But all in all, this is one of his best relationships overall, hence the placement. Rounding out the healthy section of our list, we've got Quagmire and Courtney. This one is going to sound pretty bad on paper, but we have to remember this is Family Guy logic. Courtney's from the Season 17 episode No Giggity, No Doubt, where Glenn meets her at a high school prom. Now, Glenn makes sure to ask her how old she is, and she confirms she's 18. But before anything happens, Glenn finds out that they're related, and after this point, he switches to trying to be a good father. This starts with him offering for her to live with him at his house, and changes quite a lot since he takes the dad thing very seriously. Now, we get into the meat and potatoes of this list. These are the toxic relationships. Starting off the toxic section of our list is the relationship between Quagmire and Lois. This has been explored in a multitude of episodes, most recently in Season 20's The Lois Quagmire. Quagmire has been heavily interested in Lois for a long time, despite her and Peter having been married for quite a long time. Glenn is shown to be attracted to her, spying on her at times and hitting on her at others. Now, he tells Brian in one episode that he's only really attracted to her body, to show that he's better than him because he's honest. But despite this, on multiple occasions, Lois and Quagmire get together in one way or another. The Season 8 episode Big Man on Hippocampus has the two get together when Peter has amnesia, and he's shown to be quite good for her. In another episode that takes place in an alternate timeline, Season 5's finale Meet the Quagmires shows that if Peter and Lois hadn't gotten together, she would have married Quagmire. The next relationship on our list is between Quagmire and Carrie. This comes from the Season 20 episode Must Love Dogs. Quagmire meets Carrie when she and her niece come to his house while trick-or-treating. This leads to Quagmire and Carrie hitting it off, and they do seem to care about each other until Glenn learns that she loves dogs. As we know, Glenn doesn't particularly like dogs, so he ends up repeatedly lying to her to try and get with her.
For a dog? And what's your return policy, is it?
This leads to him proposing to her through Brian, and having to deal with her intense amount of dogs and the problems that arise from that. The next relationship on our list is between Quagmire and Loretta. The entirety of this relationship is explored in Season 4's The Cleveland-Loretta Quagmire, where Loretta, Cleveland's wife, sleeps with Glenn. It's said that this happens because Cleveland's generally emotionless personality doesn't excite Loretta anymore, so she instead gets with Glenn. This obviously doesn't last long, as many of Glenn's relationships fall apart similarly, but this relationship is predicated on the betrayal of a friendship, even though Glenn does feel bad about this, so we have a very hard time placing this relationship. Hopefully this fits the general vibe we're looking at. Up next, we've got Quagmire and Monica, a relationship from the season 17 episode Island Adventure. Monica is a middle-aged woman that Glenn has quite a lot of trouble getting with. He keeps getting shot down by her, leading to him going to Lois for advice, which he uses. However, he very quickly disregards her to get with other women, which Lois gets angry about. This is a very short situation, but the fact that he just tosses her aside, while not a surprise, definitely ranks them here. Iconic for all the wrong reasons, the next relationship we need to talk about is Quagmire and Brian. Quagmire and Brian initially seemed to be quite good friends due to Brian being Peter's dog, but as of season 8 and our favorite episode to talk about apparently, Jerome is the New Black, it's shown that Glenn hates Brian. Glenn hates Brian for 101 reasons, including but not limited to constantly hitting on Lois, driving a Prius, looking down on religious people, being untrustworthy, more.
I could forgive all of that, all of it, if you weren't such a bore.
While initially not despising Quagmire, this hatred became mutual, and episodes like Teagues for Two from season 9 showed that Brian is willing to date Cheryl Teagues just to mess with Quagmire. And the aforementioned season 8 episode Quagmire's Dad has Quagmire brutally assault and attack Brian for having relations with Ida. Even more recent episodes like season 20's Must Love Dogs explore this relationship in depth, with Quagmire using Brian to get into bed with a woman. Brian even forces the two to get married, much to Glenn's chagrin. We've only scratched the surface on this relationship, but it definitely deserves this spot on our list. But now we get down to the worst possible relationships. These are the disturbing. Quite short, but the next on our list is Quagmire and Sandra from the season 15 episode, The Dating Game. When Glenn finds out about the hookup app Tinder, he becomes a crazed husk of a man unlike himself that Peter and the gang have to fix. After fixing Glenn, he becomes depressed about what had happened and feels like he's lost his spark until he meets Sandra. He immediately tricks Sandra into sleeping with him by telling her a phony story about his dead twin brother and taking her home. And like many of Quagmire's other conquests, being based on trickery, we can't in good conscience rank this situation any higher. One of Glenn's few marriages, Quagmire and Charmise, is next on our list. In the season 11 episode, The Giggity Wife, Quagmire accidentally marries Charmise, a lady of the night, while he's drunk. He doesn't particularly like her too much and tries to break up with her by pretending to be gay. This doesn't go too well because she tries to force him into having gay relations with Peter to prove it. The two eventually manage to split up, but not before a terrible breach of privacy, mostly on the part of Charmise, which is quite the change considering Glenn is usually the one who provides all of the terrible moments in the series. Another very short one we still need to talk about is Quagmire and Tracy Bellings. In a flashback during the season 12 episode of Fistful of Meg, it's revealed that Tracy is one of Quagmire's earliest relationships. Tracy was a bully who berated Glenn over his choice of Royal Crown Cola rather than Coke or Pepsi. This led to a mix of an assault and a sexual encounter that has stuck with Quagmire for most of his life. Apparently, this was the start of a long abusive relationship that was mostly public. The weirdly popular Quagmire and Meg relationship ranks next on our list. Now, Meg and Quagmire interact quite often, them being neighbors and Meg being the daughter of Glenn's best friend, but they don't really get together until the season 10 episode, Quagmire and Meg. This is a very weird relationship because despite how they are in every other episode, the Quagmire and Meg episode throws everything out the window. It's obvious throughout the episode that he is not only doing it exclusively to sleep with her, but it's also obvious that he's manipulating her throughout the episode to try and get in her pants. This is disturbing because not only did she just turn 18, but she's the daughter of, again, his best friend, and Quagmire's likely known her since she was a baby. Up next on our list, we've got Quagmire and Brooke Roberts. This is a relationship that only appears in season 4's Brian the Bachelor. where both Brian and Quagmire are on The Bachelorette to date Brooke Roberts. Quagmire is one of the first bachelors to get a rose during the show, showing that Brooke liked him at least a little bit. However, this falls into the disturbing category for good reason, because on their private date, which was being filmed because it's a reality show, he roofied her and tried to take advantage of her. He luckily doesn't get to that point because he catches the camera people, but he was just about to. In fact, he ends up in the final two because Brooke is unaware of what happened. He doesn't end up winning because he was trying to have a three-way between him, Brooke, and his own mother, which is a whole other can of worms. The next relationship is a short one, between Quagmire and Jennifer Love Hewitt. In the season 3 episode, Stuck Together, Torn Apart, it's revealed that Jennifer Love Hewitt is the niece of Mort and Muriel Goldman, who they set up on a date with Peter. At the end of the night, Lois breaks up the date between Peter and Jennifer, and she goes to get drinks. Jennifer is subsequently drugged by Quagmire via the use of a roofie colada, which she orders on most dates, apparently. Now, we don't see what happens past this, but it's pretty easy to figure out. Bagging the bronze medal of disturbing is the relationship between Quagmire and Kira. These two are shown together very briefly in the season 13 episode Quagmire's Mom. Kira is a girl that Glenn meets at Peter's party, who he almost immediately takes home to sleep with when Lois arrives. It turns out that Kira was only 17, meaning she was underage, despite saying that she was 23. This leads to Quagmire getting arrested, although he still sends pictures of the deeds to Joe and his friends, which is a whole other crime in of itself. He was even sentenced as guilty and would have gone to prison if not for his mother. Stealing our silver medal of disturbing is Quagmire and Joan. Joan first appears in the season 4 episode, I Take Thee, Quagmire. Peter wins Wheel of Fortune and Joan is the maid he got from the show. She meets Quagmire and the two fall in love. This is one of the few times where Quagmire seems to actively love someone instead of being the personification of our lust medal. Not too long after he proposes to Joan and the two get legally married, and while they seem happy at first, Glenn very quickly falls back into his lustful ways and tries to divorce her, which leads to her threatening to murder Quagmire and then kill herself. Quagmire then tries to fake his death multiple times and only stops when Joan accidentally kills herself by touching Death's arm. Disturbingly, he then asks Death to leave the body behind for 5 minutes, supposedly for him to do things with. So this relationship is pretty much on another level as far as being screwed up. Finally grabbing the gold medal of disturbing relationships is Quagmire and Sonia. In the season 12 episode Quagmire's Quagmire, we're introduced to Sonia. Glenn meets Sonia when he goes to return a laptop that has stopped functioning. It turns out that she is just as lustful as he is. The two initially hit it off due to being so similar, but it very quickly goes south after this. Sonia drugs him to make sure she can sleep with him on their first night, and Glenn initially thinks he's in love with her because of this. Sonia slowly becomes worse and worse though, humiliating him at every turn and even kidnapping him. She even attempts to shoot Joe when they try to save Quagmire. As the episode's title implies, Sonia ends up being just as disturbing as Quagmire himself. The town of Quahog, Rhode Island is home to one of the most popular and unruly casts of animated characters ever put on the small screen. While we as an audience love them and their hijinks, it would not be too harsh to say that the characters of Family Guy are some of the meanest and most self-centered people in all of cartoons, even by the standards of adult animation. So, what would happen if we took this off-color roster of men, women, and giant chicken into the throes of a Squid Game competition? Who will fall? Who will prevail? Whatever the outcome, we know for sure that it's going to be a freaking sweet one. I'm Kifinosi with Wicked Binge, and this is which Family Guy character would win Squid Game. You're probably well aware of the rules by now, but if you aren't, let's make this quick. In this edition of Squid Game, all characters will enter the competition with no special weapons, abilities, nor anything that could give them an unfair advantage over their opponents. We'll also only be looking at characters who originated from the Family Guy series. Characters from shows like The Cleveland Show and American Dad will not be included. But onto who will be included. Today's Squid Game will feature 25 players, including Peter, Lois, Chris, Meg, Stewie, Brian, Joe, Cleveland, Quagmire, Ernie, Consuela, Mayor West, Seamus, Dr. Hartman, Mort, Herbert, Tom Tucker, Diane Simmons, The Evil Monkey, Carl, Bonnie, Bertram, Jillian Carter, and Kevin Swanson. With the rules set and the players introduced, let's start things off with the first game of the day. Red Light, Green Light. Red Light, Green Light is one of the most iconic games we featured in the Netflix series, and it's also one of the easiest to explain. Each player must make their way through a course before time runs out. Along the way, they'll have to listen closely for orders to stop. Failing to do either one of these will result in instant death. Thankfully, all the player needs to survive this game are keen ears and a fast pair of feet. Both Stewie and Bertram would pass this game with little trouble. trouble. They're among the smartest characters in the entire show and a couple of the fastest too. Neither one would see this game as a particularly hard challenge to overcome. Brian is another character that would survive without much of a problem. Though he's honestly more human than K9, he still knows how to listen for command.
Sorry, I don't do dog shows. It's not my thing.
And the ability to run on all fours would likely allow him to be the first to win the game. We also believe that the evil monkey would succeed here for similar reasons. Between his great athleticism and patient mind, he'd be out of this game in no time. Sadly, not every character will make it out of this first game, and the first one on the chopping block is, of course, Meg. Why, you may ask? Well, this is Family Guy we're talking about. It would honestly be weirder if she wasn't the first character to get eliminated. Mort is the second loss of the game, and one we saw coming. Mort is very cowardly, and his tendency to panic will cost him his life. We also have to say goodbye to Quahog's Mayor Adam West this round. West is a pretty naive character when you look at him. He'd likely not take the rules of the game as seriously as he should, which would lead to his elimination. Our fourth and final death of this game is Jillian. A character ironically well remembered for being rather clueless, we doubt that Jillian would remember the rules of the game as soon as it starts, which is ultimately what will seal her fate.
Hey, Oogie!
The first game is down, but we've still got several more to go. Up next is a game that's both bitter and sweet, the Honeycomb Challenge. In this game, patience and steadiness are more important than anything. At the beginning of the game, each player is given a cookie, and they need to carve out a predetermined shape without breaking the treat. Steadiness will be handy in making sure the pieces come out intact, and patience is necessary for helping players prevent any sudden mistakes. While he's far from the brightest kid, Chris Griffin is a character we think would surprise players here. He's shown multiple times throughout the show that he's a pretty good artist, so he'd be up to the challenge the game presents. Though he's not an artist, Quagmire also possesses a set of skills that would prove invaluable in this game. If he's capable of piloting planes, it seems safe to say that he has what it takes to win here. Another surprise winner for this round is Seamus. Yes, he doesn't have hands, but he can indeed draw. And if he's patient enough to learn how to draw without hands, he'd have no problem bringing that same level of patience to this game. Last up is the most understandable pick of this challenge, Dr. Hartman. A doctor who's always fiddling around with tools and equipment, Hartman would feel right at home operating on this delicacy. In regards to the losers of this game, there isn't a clearer one than Peter Griffin himself. Peter is extremely impatient in just about every aspect of his life. Unfortunately for him, this is what will lead to his defeat. For similar reasons, Tom Tucker also bows out at this stage of the game. He also suffers from a lack of patience, and nothing in the show so far indicates that his hands are all that steady. In a game where both of these attributes are key, he has neither of them. His name is Cleveland Brown, and he's the last elimination of the Honeycomb Challenge. Another character who is easily frustrated, Cleveland's slower pace would only carry him so far in this one.
That's nice mentality.
We take a break now from the games for another pivotal part of the competition. That's right, it's time to discuss the Midnight Brawl. Taking place between the second and third games, the scenario here is as simple as it sounds. A brawl takes place when the players are supposed to be sleeping, and it leads to great bloodshed. To survive a brutal moment like this, players can focus on taking out their competitors, creating alliances with stronger contestants, or they can hide out and wait for the carnage to subside. Realistically, most Family Guy characters would have little trouble tackling other players. They're always getting into fights and scuffles with each other, so it would hardly be out of character for anyone here. There are a few that would succeed exceptionally well, however. Lois and the giant chicken, whose name is Ernie by the way, have gotten into numerous fights throughout the show and would be able to defend themselves excellently here. Lois, in particular, received martial arts training in one episode, which would greatly help her out here. Both Joe Swanson and his son Kevin are police and military personnel respectively, so they would have a level of skill few others would have. While Family Guy has a lot of brawlers, the show also features plenty of schemers. Characters like Stewie and Bertram, and even Channel 5 news anchor Diane Simmons are great at manipulating others for personal gain. These three would probably team up with the more physical players and pick off others that could pose a threat to them. Although Family Guy might have plenty of good fighters, there are a few that will come up short. One that immediately comes to mind is Seamus. He's quite literally a man with wooden arms and legs. He's a walking target for just about every other player, and we imagine he wouldn't last long during the ordeal. Even though he's called the evil monkey, we feel this character is far too nice and polite to try and take out any of the other players.
This is a great chance for us to start over.
He would probably be taken out by a gang of other players, ending his time in the Squid Games. The Midnight Brawl will also see the end of the cashier Carl, a character who is lazier than most. He's one of the few left standing who has little combat experience, making his elimination a no-brainer. The last to fall during the brawl is Bonnie. Like Carl, Bonnie is not a character who's prone to fighting like a lot of the other characters are. This makes her noticeably weaker than most others and an easy target for them. 11 are gone so far, but we still have 14 players left standing. The next game they will have to survive is a classic bout of Tug of War. Tug of War doesn't really need an explanation, but we do want to make it clear that we'll be looking at this game a bit differently from how it's presented in the show. Rather than splitting the characters into distinct groups, we'll be judging each character's chances at survival based on two elements: strength and a willingness to work with others. Poor strength and a self-centered attitude will only lead to disaster here, so it's incredibly important to have both of these areas covered, or at least one of them, extremely well. Family Guy characters tend to act on their own interests, but there in fact are a few characters who will gladly help others. Both Kevin and his father Joe are no strangers to saving lives, and they're easily among the strongest characters left standing. Even Joe, who is wheelchair-bound, would get out of this game alive. Although he's more of an antagonist than anything else, Ernie the Giant Chicken has been shown to have a softer side. Couple that with his good physique, and this chicken is a recipe for victory. When it comes to the characters who will surely be eliminated here, few seem as obvious as Carter Pewterschmidt. He's easily the most selfish character in the entire show, and his self-interest will cost him greatly in the end.
We go to a local orphanage, pick out a kid, fill out all the paperwork, and then don't take him home.
Consuela doesn't have the strongest build out of the show's many characters, and she's also not one for teamwork. To say she's not making out of this one alive would be quite an understatement. Though Herbert has somehow managed to survive a rather lengthy amount of time in this contest, it'll be this challenge that will prove to be his breaking point. Without a doubt, the weakest character in the show, Herbert would offer little help to anyone in this game. We're down to the final 11 as we get to a particularly important moment in the series, the marble game. Unlike every other game played in the show, the marble game doesn't have a strict set of rules to follow. Players are put into groups of 2 and are to obtain their opponent's marbles before the game ends. This level of freedom is something that especially the cunning and ruthless players will use to their advantage. More than anything else, players will need to show their smarts if they're to get the upper hand. In a game like this, few will prove to be as dangerous as Stewie and Bertram. These big-brained babies have the art of manipulation down to a T, and will use it to help make this game theirs. Likewise, Diane Simmons has proven to be a master schemer in prior episodes. If she could orchestrate several murders and cover them up, she could easily outsmart her opponents in a marble game. Of the characters left standing, few seem as ill-equipped for a game like this as Chris does. He's an easy character to manipulate, and he's not too bright either. Add these traits together, and you've got a surefire recipe for disaster. Though she isn't the dumbest character in the show, Lois is far too trusting, especially of the previously mentioned characters. Any of them could get the jump on her, and she wouldn't notice until it was too late. Quagmire has made it pretty far today, but he's yet another character who's been outsmarted and bamboozled. He's very easy to read, and this is a weakness that his opponents will be quick to exploit. The final character to fall during this game will be Kevin Swanson. Though he's great physically, he's not the smartest, especially compared to who he's up against. Now we finally made it to the penultimate game, Glass Stepping Stones. Glass Stepping Stones is a game that sounds simple, but is far more complex the more you look into it. Players need to make it across a series of glass stones, but many of them are made of a material that looks just like glass, but will cause the players to fall to their deaths upon walking over. In a game like this, all you need is patience, agility, and a lot of luck. Obviously, Joe Swanson is the first death of the game. He is immediately at a disadvantage due to the fact that this game is not wheelchair accessible, so sadly the fact that he needs one will cost him his chance at winning. Dr. Hartman might be intelligent, but is he smart enough to tell different types of glass from one another?
Okay, heart sounds good.
Probably not, and it's that which leads to his elimination. Diane Simmons is also a great mind, but she also has a giant ego. We imagine that she'd be one of the first to try and brave the stones, only to fall a few steps in. Both Brian and Ernie would fall for similar reasons. Being that they're animals, it's unlikely that they'd be as well coordinated as the other players, meaning that they'd probably trip up sooner rather than later. But real quick, before we get to our last entry, if you're enjoying this video, do us a huge favor and hit that subscribe button and notification bell. We ask because we'd really appreciate the help getting to our next milestone, and we have lots more videos we'd love to share with you. Thanks so much. 2 remain as we jump into the big finale, The Squid Game. While this is named after a classic children's game, the way we'll be looking at this will be more akin to how it's presented in the Netflix series. It's a bloody and brutal battle to the end between 2 players, and in the end, only one will be left standing. The Squid Game will be fought between our last 2 players, Stewie and Bertram. Both of these characters are very much alike, so we have a pretty fair match when you really look at it. Stewie and Bertram are both highly intelligent, skilled fighters, and even have prior experience dealing with each other. While that is of great benefit, for one player that will sadly be a major hindrance. The character who will be hurt more by that fact is Bertram. You see, while they have indeed fought on numerous occasions, Bertram has pretty much always lost these conflicts. A later appearance even featured Stewie killing Bertram for good, so it seems to be pretty clear who would win here. Even if you get past these facts, Stewie has dealt with way worse things than Bertram. He's been on tons and tons of crazy adventures, so Bertram would be a walk in the park by comparison. Sorry Bertram, but it looks like there's only room in Quahog for one evil baby. The winner of this Squid Game is Stewie Griffin, thanks to his prior experience in dealing with his opponent and the sheer amount of more intense conflicts that he's dealt with. But let us know in the comment section if you agree with our winner, and tell us what we should cover next. Remember to hit that notification bell and binge more of our videos, but most importantly, stay wicked.
Stop trying to be my dad, you fraud!
Whose leg do you have to hump to get a video about Brian Griffin's relationships around here? Not mine, no, seriously, don't. We'll just give it to you. Family Guy's mostly beloved pet dog has charmed his way into the hearts of viewers for years, and he has quite a way with women too. Given the fact that he's a dog, that's concerning. But this is Family Guy we're talking about.
And somebody's been rooting in a sardine can.
I'm Kristijan with Wicked Binge, and these are Brian Griffin's relationships. Healthy to toxic to disturbing. As usual, we'll start with the best relationships before we descend down into the toxic. These are the healthy relationships. You've got a lot to see in this list, and it all starts with Pearl Burton taking home the gold medal of healthiness. Appearing in Brian Wallows and Peter's Swallows, one of the most beloved Family Guy episodes, Pearl is a bitter and spiteful old shut-in Brian meets through a mandatory elderly outreach program. Initially, Brian ends up berating and bailing on her due to her mistreatment of him, but he soon discovers that she was once an American jingle singer who dreamed of bigger things, yet never could shake the reputation of her jingles, with her listeners clamoring for her to sing them during her passionate opera performances. Brian has more sympathy for her after this, reaching out to her again and even stopping her from taking her own life. He starts to spend time with her outside of work, listening to her sing and enjoying dinners together. He encourages her via song to leave her house for the first time in 30 years to finally see the world, but she's sadly hit by a truck as soon as she commits to doing so. In a bittersweet conclusion, Brian uses a virtual reality helmet to show her what life could have been had the two been able to spend the rest of it together. We thought initially of taking points away from this relationship for how strained it started out, but we honestly can't blame either of them too much given that Pearl was incredibly forlorn and bitter, and Brian was being mistreated by her pretty badly.
What is this, diarrhea soup?
The end product was nonetheless sweet and maybe the most genuinely kind and heartfelt we've seen Brian have. There's not a trace of the superficiality he'd develop later in the series. He genuinely falls in love with a broken woman, gives her what she herself calls the best days of her life, and wants to show her that the world is not as bitter and hopeless as she thinks it is. This may be a surprising choice, but we're giving the silver medal of healthiness to Ida Davis. Ida is best known for being Glenn Quagmire's father turned transgender mother, and for the infamous hookup she had with Brian in the episode Quagmire's dad.
Oh my god!
While Brian was rather disgusted upon learning that she was once Quagmire's father, Dan Quagmire, years later the two met up at a bar in Brida and rekindled their relationship. It does admittedly take some effort on Brian's part to be comfortable with their newfound time together, but surprisingly, Brian ends up choosing to date Ida for real, and the two slowly build a genuinely sweet relationship. Despite the strain between Glenn and Brian, he makes an effort to connect with him, as awkward as it may be. Unfortunately, it's this very strain that makes Quagmire unable to accept their relationship, despite all of Brian's well-intentioned efforts. Not wanting to choose Brian over her own son, Ida bids him farewell. They split on good terms, and their relationship ended up surprisingly healthy, especially when Brian's initial disgust at their fling is considered. She takes home the gold at your typical dog show, but Ellie still earns our bronze medal of healthiness. As the only dog Brian's dated since Seabreeze, man, it's weird that it took more than 10 seasons to revisit that, huh? Ellie is a show dog that Brian meets at the vet. The two actually get along really well from the get-go, with Ellie even assuring Brian that he doesn't have to try hard to impress her, and that she likes him for himself. Given how shallow Brian's relationships oftentimes are, we'll get to those, it's a nice change of pace for him to authentically get along with somebody so quickly. When he learns that Ellie is a show dog who may only be bred with by the winner of a dog show, Brian enters it with the intent of winning, and while this might sound like one of his usual schemes to get laid, here he genuinely wants to keep the connection he has with Ellie. Sadly, things don't pan out when Brian realizes that the grand prize is less intimate than one might expect. Rather than expecting Ellie to change her lifestyle of forced breeding for him, Brian breaks things off on good terms, acknowledging that their worlds just couldn't mix the way he'd hoped.
Ha! He's blowing it! He can't do it!
It's a real shame because, despite their differences, Brian and Ellie had a genuine connection, and despite earlier episodes suggesting he found them degrading, he was willing to enter and even win a dog show to keep that connection. And as sad as it is to say, we've already reached the end of the good territory. This is the gray area. Here we have the relationships that definitely could use some work. Lauren Conrad is first in this territory. A Family Guy-ified version of The Hills star by the same name, Lauren Conrad was something of a rebound for Brian after he found out that his ex-girlfriend Jillian was getting married. Lauren and Brian initially hit it off with their love for the finer things in life. However, things start to fall flat when Lauren illustrates that she's actually smarter than Brian, a fact that Brian just can't get over.
Come on, Brian. You know America doesn't like smart people.
Lauren did genuinely care for Brian and wanted their relationship to last, but because of his own ego, Brian couldn't stand being the dumber partner in a relationship. Ultimately, Lauren mainly served as a wheel for Brian to realize the true extent of his feelings for Jillian, even encouraging encouraging him to tell her how he feels so that he can at least have closure. Things couldn't have worked out with Brian's ego being considered, but at the end of the day, Lauren ended up being a decent influence on him, even pushing him to get closure with Jillian. Peter may have had James Woods, but Brian had Shauna Parks. Momentarily, that is. In Peter's Got Woods, Brian meets Shauna at a PTA meeting Peter didn't want to go to, and when the two set up a date, he tries to impress her by really expressing just how not racist he is, even pitching the idea of renaming the school after Martin Luther King instead of keeping it named after James Woods. The idea goes under, however, and so does Brian's relationship with Shauna when, upon her giving an ultimatum of bailing on his friendship with Peter or losing his relationship with her, he naturally chooses the latter. We can't quite call this relationship toxic, since Shauna at least had the decency to tell Brian she wasn't okay with his friendship with Peter, and Brian wasn't willing to dump his best friend of many years for a woman he hardly knew. It might not have worked out, but things definitely could have been a lot worse on both ends, leaving this relationship on the lighter end of Brian's failed flings. Next up, we take a trip to India to see Padma. Sounds ridiculous and impulsive, right? Yeah, well, we agree. And it's exactly what Brian does in Road to India. He falls in love with an Indian woman named Padma he speaks to on tech support. Yes, you heard that right. He's so madly in love with this woman he barely knows that he travels across the globe to meet her. This would be incredibly creepy, but Padma actually reciprocates Brian's feelings for her. With Brian's influence, she's able to escape from an arranged marriage to a man she doesn't love, but unfortunately she loses interest in Brian when she realizes that he knows nothing about her culture and that the two have little in common. Alright, we know you've all been waiting for this, so let's get into the toxic relationships, and unsurprisingly, there are many of them. Brooke Roberts is an interesting case. When Brian goes on The Bachelorette, he starts out extremely cynical towards the show, until he falls in love with Brooke, the Bachelorette in question. The show becomes all too real to Brian, as does his relationship with her, in his mind, that is, even after the show ends and she assures Brian that it was all just for the cameras.
Well, it was great working with you, Brian. Good luck.
He continues to try and reach her to the point where he ends up having an answering machine thrown at him when he tries to serenade her. Their time on the show may have been nice, but it wasn't a real relationship, save for in Brian's mind. For a connection that never even existed on the ladies' end, it led to Brian becoming a full-on stalker until he finally took the hint that she wanted nothing to do with him. Up next is Brandy. Yes, really. After criticizing the Griffins for purchasing her, Brian becomes a total hypocrite, betraying his own advice that they've become too dependent upon technology to not only start using Brandy, but to start dating her. Brandy subsequently uses Brian's newfound love to sell him numerous products, which are charged to his best friend Peter's card, by the way. And later on, when the two run off together, she flat out bails on him after they have a fight. We're not sure what's sadder, the fact that Brian was willing to abandon and mistreat his family over falling in love with an off-brand Alexa, or the fact that he couldn't even maintain a relationship with a literal computer. Either way, this is one of Brian's most pathetic relationships to date. Rita's silver doesn't quite reach our silver medal, which would have been hilarious, but she still makes for one of Brian's less desirable relationships. In the episode Brian's Got a Brand New Bag, Brian meets Rita through getting stood up by her promiscuous daughter. He decides to not waste his evening, instead taking out Rita, and the two hit it off and begin a relatively healthy relationship. Brian even ends up standing up for her when the Griffin family berates her over Brian dating someone so much older, even proposing to her.
Come on, you're only 50, you heard me. Will you marry me?
Unfortunately, Brian's own superficiality starts to rear its ugly head when he ends up cheating on her with a much younger woman, feeling trapped by the engagement. To his credit, he does come clean with Rita and apologizes to her, but understandably, Rita dumps him for his unfaithfulness. Okay, this might seem like a really weird choice to be in the toxic category, but next up is Seabreeze Pewterschmidt. Carter's prized race dog, Seabreeze is an incredibly skilled runner who's made Carter a ludicrous amount of money over the years. Brian falls for her instantly, and due to being, we'll say suppressed, Brian rushes onto the dog track during one of her races and does the deed. Seabreeze seemed pretty surprised, and while Brian was very apologetic to both her and Carter, this was still basically assault in at least one form. We get that Brian is a dog, but he has the general intelligence of a human, so he really should have been able to control himself better. To Brian's credit, he does at least opt to take care of his puppies, so treasure this as one of the last times on this list he'll even try to do the right thing, only to find out that Ted Turner is the father instead. We hate to keep using the term dog as derogatory, but come on, man. Now let's visit Bonnie Swanson next door. Bonnie lives next to the Griffins as Joe Swanson's wife. Brian and her end up impulsively kissing at a party after a heartfelt chat, and they end up running away together when Joe's revenge schemes go too far, deciding that both of them deserve better than families that don't make them happy. First of all, Bonnie and Brian's relationship is a product of adultery, which in and of itself makes it at least a little bit toxic.
They don't get us, Bonnie, and you deserve better than this.
But when times get tough and the two have to work to make ends meet, they become increasingly critical of each other and end up breaking things off, realizing they're awful for each other and resulting in Bonnie and Joe reconnecting. expecting. Let's talk about Cheryl Teagues and remind ourselves of just how petty Brian can get. When Brian gets dumped by a woman he's trying to start a relationship with, thanks to Quagmire's class on picking up women, the latter specifies that his expertise lies in hookups, not relationships. Brian decides that he might as well settle, so he seeks out Cheryl Teagues, the one woman Quagmire truly fell in love with. It's blatantly obvious that Brian is only with Cheryl to spite Quagmire, and he consistently mistreats her per his own pickup artist advice. Cheryl was at least presumably not interested in anything serious, given the fact that the shallow tactics Quagmire taught Brian were enough to pick her up. It was a petty fling, nothing more, and nobody expected it to be, so we can't exactly put it any higher than this. But we also can't ignore that Brian's motives here were entirely in spite of someone else, even if that someone absolutely hates his guts. On the topic of lost loves, let's look at the one that got away for Brian, Jillian Russell Wilcox. Simultaneously the sweetest and dumbest girl Brian ever dated, Jillian is a total airhead. It was fairly obvious from the beginning that Brian was only dating Jillian for her appearance, since nothing else about them even remotely suggested that they were compatible. Heck, Brian often spoke to and treated her like a pet, and not in the sweet using cute nicknames way, but more so the distracting her with a laser pointer way. Ultimately, Brian grows to be sick of Jillian, and after the two move in together at Peter's suggestion, she runs off in tears when Brian reveals he didn't really want to move in with her yet.
Oh my god! I've never felt so stupid!
Brian does later realize that he was in love with Jillian, realizing his mistake in letting her go. But by this time, she's already moved on and is engaged to Derek Wilcox. Brian goes as far as to crash their wedding to proclaim his love for Jillian as a last-ditch effort to win her over, of course to no avail. Brian's relationship with Jillian was a clear showcase of his shallow side. It's clear that the only thing keeping Brian's interest in her alive at all times was her appearance, as he never seemed happy to see nor even talk to her, patronizing her at best and berating her at worst. He might have poured his heart out and showed that at the end of the day he did genuinely care for her, but it was far too late, and honestly, she deserves much better anyway. If Brian could have only swallowed his pride, he could have been happy with Jillian. Carolyn is up next. Brian's relationship with her began when the two bonded over their atheism, and it blossomed into basically nothing. Things aren't necessarily awful between these two, but over the few weeks they date, they don't become particularly close, with the aforementioned atheism really being their only common ground.
Swear to God?
This is primarily due to Stewie's advice to Brian not to take his newfound relationship too fast, resulting in him holding off on sex for a while. That, in turn, results in Carolyn cheating on Brian with Cleveland, effectively ending the relationship. It's nice to see something in this territory that doesn't have Brian at fault. Stewie's advice honestly wasn't all that bad, actually, and had Brian communicated his intent to take things slow properly, the two might have worked things out, or at least ended on more amiable terms. But sadly, a cheater is a cheater, and while it may be the last time we feel too sorry for Brian in this video, we do still kind of feel for the poor guy on this one. But enough of feeling sorry for Brian, let's talk about Amber. She's a carny from the season 21 episode Carny Problems, and as such, she's one of the newest additions to Brian's list of failed romances. Though, honestly, there was nothing too romantic about these two from the get-go. It was pretty clear on both ends that it was just about the sex, but it gets worse. When Amber breaks up with Brian, his wounded ego leads to him trying to win her back, solely so he can break up with her instead. This plan almost succeeds, but out of fear of her intimidating uncle and ex-boyfriend Earl, wait, what? Sure. Brian decides to treat her well. That said, she hasn't shown up since then, and since Stewie hints that Brian had a rough week, it's clear that things didn't end all that nicely. We're still kind of curious, though. We've seen Brian get desperate before, but his relationship with Kate was on a whole different level. When Quagmire arranges a night for disabled women at the Drunken Clam, Brian hits it off with a blind woman named Kate. Their date goes quite well, until the end, when Kate reveals that she doesn't like dogs.
They're just slobbery, annoying, needy little bastards.
Rather than being honest with her, Brian keeps up the charade that he's a human, abstaining from physical aspects of the relationship as much as he can. On one hand, it's touching that Brian cared enough about Kate to try, and lie, so hard to keep their connection going. On the other hand, their entire relationship was built on a lie, and it kept growing more and more throughout the episode. It's a real shame Kate couldn't see the red flags there. Wait, sorry, poor choice of words. Let's move on. Next is Lois. One of the most long-running facets of Brian's character is his infatuation with Peter's wife, Lois Griffin. In season 2's Brian in Love, Brian recognizes these feelings with the help of his therapist, and the result of his confession to her is surprisingly sweet, with Lois assuring Brian that she doesn't reciprocate his feelings, but that she dearly loves him as a friend. A truly sweet conclusion, if only it were the actual conclusion. The topic is revisited later in the series, and unfortunately, normally not in a good way. In season 4's The Perfect Castaway, Brian ends up marrying Lois when Peter is presumed dead after being lost at sea. The relationship is strained, with Brian providing for the family and receiving little appreciation in return, even sleeping in a separate bed from Lois, much to his frustration. Ultimately, when Peter returns, Brian decides to divorce Lois so she can return to Peter. A noble act for the sake of his best friend. Surely nothing will ever come between them again, until season 6's Play It Again, Brian, in which Brian takes Lois and Peter on a trip where he reads a poem about her and ultimately assaults her, desperate to finally be with her. Again, Brian apologizes to Lois, but hints of these feelings still come up every so often. We can't put this relationship any higher since, to an extent, Lois and Brian are friends and often have some heartfelt moments with each other. There's also been multiple attempts to handle Brian's feelings in a healthy way, but the toxicity of Brian's attempts to steal his best friend's wife and even try to force himself onto her is awful. Even Quagmire calls Brian out on this, which says a lot. Landing just inside of our top 5 is Tracy Flanagan, an old girlfriend of Brian's and the mother of his estranged son. There's not too much known about Brian and Tracy's relationship. From what we can gather, however, it wasn't good. Even Brian himself acknowledges that he treated her poorly in hindsight. One example of this was that his only concern when she opened up about her being sexually abused by her father was that she did go all the way, offering her absolutely no sympathy nor comfort. Tracy also dumps her son onto Brian later in the same episode this is revealed, claiming that he's his problem, which is honestly kinda understandable since he was the father, but still poor communication on both ends. We may know very little about Tracy, but we know enough to conclude that she's one of Brian's least successful relationship endeavors, and don't even get us started on how awful of a father he is. At least Peter's there. Next is Brian's almost relationship with Miss Emily. When Stewie informs Brian of this preschool teacher's neglectful, abusive behavior, Brian goes over to have a little talk with her, only to immediately change his tune when he sees how attractive she is. Brian subsequently begins flirting with Miss Emily and refuses to report her to the police until he has a chance to sleep with her. Brian knows full well the harm Miss Emily causes her students, but he still has absolutely no issue with delaying justice and endangering the multitude of young children in her care, including Stewie, who is Brian's closest friend and even has his arm dislocated by her at one point.
Does this look like I slept on it funny?
Ultimately, Brian does report her, but only after he finds out that she has a boyfriend already, so he won't get what he wants out of her. While this didn't even end up being the start of a relationship, Brian's intentions were clear, and boy were they scummy. We've made it to our top 3 most toxic Brian Griffin relationships, and we decided to give them their own category. These relationships are disturbing, straight up. The bronze medal of toxicity goes to Tori. Returning to the theme of cheating spouses, Tori is a woman Brian met at a car wash. The two hit it off and ultimately sleep together. Brian, to his credit, didn't initially know that Tori was married. However, even once she reveals this to him, he has no problem pretending to be the family dog so they can continue their fling. When Tori's husband Vic, a former Navy SEAL, suspects her of cheating, he enlists Brian as a guard dog to catch the culprit. Additionally, Tori herself leaves to stay with her mother with no regard for her recent lover's safety. She's perfectly content leaving him chained up in the yard. It's hard to believe that the character who was once the Griffin family's voice of reason has devolved into one who's willing to pretend to be a pet just so we can continue having an affair with the wife of a former Navy SEAL. Arguably Brian's creepiest attempt at a relationship, the silver medal of toxicity goes to Patty. In the episode Scammed Yankees, we see Brian go from general douchebag to full-on creep. After spending the first third of his B-plot complaining about Meg's friends, who aren't even paying him any attention, by the way, just talking in their room, Brian accidentally sees one of them in a changing room. He grows infatuated with Patty instantly and decides to give the term dog groomer an entirely new meaning, attempting to win Patty over with gifts and general flattery. Meg and even Stewie tell Brian how much of a creep he's being, but he's still fully willing and ready to take advantage of a high school girl and would have done it had it not been for Meg showing up to talk Patty out of it at the last moment. Side note, yes, we're aware that Patty is 18, and furthermore, what Brian was doing here was technically legal, but legal or not, a man in his 50s, in dog years, going after a teenage girl who hasn't even graduated high school is still incredibly creepy. Maybe not Herbert the pervert level creepy, but definitely creepy nonetheless. Hard to believe this isn't the gold medalist, right? Well, we assure you it was a very difficult choice, but Jess Griffin just barely earns the gold medal of toxicity. Brian meets Jess at a bar, and upon learning that she has terminal cancer, he decides to help her fill out her sex bucket list. The fun ends when Jess's doctor informs her that she only has weeks to live, utterly devastating her. Brian decides to let her fulfill at least one of her dreams before dying by marrying her and letting her experience life with someone who loves her for her last few weeks on Earth. While this is all very sweet on the surface, it turns sour when Brian gets the news after the wedding that Jess's cancer is in full remission, so the two can spend their full lives together. Brian quickly grows dissatisfied with the marriage, with Jess letting loose in celebration of her appetites for return.
I'm not ready to be married. I gotta get a divorce.
It's hard to blame him for not wanting to marry someone he didn't know all that well and ultimately only proposed to because she was literally going to die. But that doesn't give him an excuse for letting her choke to death at a restaurant to get out of the marriage. Brian initially plays it off as struggling to find information about how to do the Heimlich maneuver, but when she miraculously wakes up after the funeral, Brian's sobbing and the next episode's ending flat out confirms that he let Jess die rather than continue the marriage. Brian's lack of communication skills has been noticeable before, but never this detrimental. That said, Jess isn't innocent either. However, when Brian begins to also let himself go, breaking his hip in the process, Jess starts having to take care of him all hours of the day. Naturally, this is too much for her to handle, so she hires some help, is what we'd say if she were a reasonable human being. No, instead she opts to have Brian euthanized. At the end of the episode, the two conclude that they deserve each other because marriage is just a bond between two people who hate each other. Their words, not ours. It's an awful message from two awful people who have done awful things to each other. Brian's selfishness is on full display here, and it would be hard to take the gold medal of toxicity from this relationship.
Fine, I'll play along. I guess I've lied before.
Who doesn't love Peter Griffin? Well, okay, plenty of people, but he's definitely one of our favorite cartoon characters. I guess you could say that we're lucky there's a Family Guy. Sometimes. The lovable oaf has plenty of nice things that he's done in the past, but he also has no shortage of evil deeds under his belt. I'm Keefe Inosi with Wicked Binge, and these are Peter Griffin's deeds. Good to evil. If we were to rank everything Peter has done in Family Guy, especially given how many cutaway gags there are, we'd be here all day. So cutaways are off the table, unless they actually tie into the episode's plot. The good deeds. First up is Peter refusing to revenge cheat on Lois. Only in Family Guy could there be a plotline as absurd as a man befriending Bill Clinton, resulting in his wife sleeping with him. Peter understandably feels betrayed when he learns that his wife has been unfaithful with his new friend, again Bill Clinton, and the troubled couple decides on a solution. Peter will sleep with a woman of his choice to even things out. Peter chooses Lois's mother. Not gonna think too hard about that. But when the time comes, Peter decides against it, declaring that he would never want to do anything to hurt his wife.
All I know is I don't want to do anything to hurt you.
This episode is rightfully cited by many as the beginning of Lois and Peter's marriage going further and further down the drain. But if nothing else, Peter was very sweet here, especially given how hurt he was. Now, just hear us out. Peter committing welfare fraud for his family is counted among his good deeds. For this entry, we're going back to the very first episode of Family Guy. In Death Has a Shadow, Peter unwittingly commits welfare fraud when the government sends him way more money than expected. Not exactly a great deed to start out, until you realize that it wasn't done on purpose.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, maybe I'm like their 1 millionth customer.
When Peter receives an excessive welfare check, he takes it as a blessing and uses it to give his family a better life. And when it's found out that this was illegal, he rents a blimp to drop the excess money back down to the tax-paying citizens of Quahog. It's still a crime, but because of his ignorance and genuinely well-meaning intentions, we're going to count it as a good deed on Peter's record. Next up is... wait, okay, I must be misreading this next entry. Loving Meg? Impossible. Ludicrous, even. But, okay, well, believe it or not, after Meg has a near-death experience when the Griffin house floods in Peter's daughter, Peter makes a vow to treat her better going forward.
If you come out of this, I am going to treat you like a princess for the rest of your life.
While this newfound mindset obviously doesn't last forever, it's a sweet sentiment for this episode. Peter shows great concern for his daughter, trying his best to make her life better. He's nicer to her, he stands up to her bullies, and is protective of her when she falls in love with a boy who happens to be a nudist. When he sees that her feelings are genuine, he accepts their relationship, even joining in their, culture, to make him feel more at home. It's kinda sad that being nice to his daughter for an episode has to be mentioned on this list, but hey, at least we know Peter kinda cares about Meg deep down. Speaking of Meg, next we have Peter standing up for Meg. While Peter has become a rather infamous character in the later seasons, generally portrayed as an outright abusive sociopath, he does still have some good moments. In The Peter Principal, Peter becomes an interim principal at Adam West High when Principal Shepard is placed on indefinite leave. While Peter does become a bit of a tyrant, using his influence to assert dominance over the popular kids at school, this can actually be attributed to Meg's influence. Peter himself genuinely meant well in the episode, wanting to run the school right. When a bully spills Meg's juice pouch on her, Peter reprimands him and forces him to lick the mess off the floor. Maybe a bit extreme, but nah, who are we kidding? We love seeing Peter actually stand up for his incredibly unfortunate daughter. Good work, Peter, you occasionally decent dad, you. Now we move from Meg to Peter's next child, Chris. Remembering the time Peter supported Chris's passion for drawing. The best way to describe Peter as a parent in the first few seasons of the show is ignorant, but genuinely well-meaning at the same time. In The Sun Also Draws, Peter goes to great lengths to help Chris regain his place in the Boy Scouts. A sweet gesture already, but what he doesn't realize is that Chris doesn't really care about the Scouts. He'd rather pursue his hobby of drawing. And while the two are on a vision quest, Peter realizes he needs to listen to Chris, and he accepts him and his passion for drawing, supporting him all the way. As misguided and ignorant as he may be, Peter's genuinely trying his best to show love and support to his son here, and that's worth a lot. He may not be a beacon of morality, but Peter is at least sometimes willing to stand up for what's right, like speaking out against smoking. One time, a smoking conglomerate bought out Mr. Weed's toy factory, and upon becoming suspicious that they were encouraging children to smoke, Peter immediately stood up to them, but he was instead bought off with the offer to become their president and spokesperson. Seems like it kinda went wrong, but when he ends up on Capitol Hill to argue in favor of the company, Peter has a change of heart when he sees Stewie coughing and suffering from withdrawal, consequently calling out the corrupt practices of the company. You may notice a common trend with many of these good deeds, that Peter tends to get himself, and often his family, into messed up situations, but manages to fix them. This is one such deed, and that fact is why it's not any higher, despite it being a pretty noble act.
Look, I don't care about this stupid job anymore. Cigarettes are bad.
We have to dock this one a few points, since he was initially blinded by the prospects of money and power, but the fact that he was ultimately willing to give it all up to speak out against injustice speaks a lot to the big guy's character. Somebody call Long John Peter, because next up is hunting down Daggermouth. What Peter almost always lacks in foresight, he makes up for in wacky schemes that somehow work out. Case in point, when Peter lists his house and everything in it as collateral to pay for a new fishing boat. He ends up owing $50,000 to the shady bank he got it from. The only option to save his home is to hunt down the legendary Daggermouth, a trek from which nobody has ever returned alive. Nonetheless, Peter still takes it on and actually succeeds for the sake of his family. This deed falls into the same boat as the last one in that, as impressive and noble as it is, Peter still very much got himself and his family into it. It wasn't malicious, sure, but it was reckless and irresponsible, which docks it just a few points. Returning to the later seasons, we have Peter trying to show Carter the Christmas spirit. It's no secret that Peter and Carter have a pretty toxic relationship, possibly one of the most toxic in the whole show, but that doesn't stop Peter from trying his best to show him the Christmas spirit in this episode. When the Quahog Christmas Carnival is suddenly cancelled by him, Stewie's understandably upset, so Peter does his best to change Carter's mind with various Christmas activities. Drink the nog, Carter.
Drink the nog, Carter.
When all this ends up unsuccessful, Peter convinces Carter that people will think he's Jewish if he doesn't bring back the carnival. It's not the most conventional method, but it works, and it gives Stewie a special experience he would have missed out on otherwise. It's also the reason the family was able to reunite with Brian, so that's nice. Speaking of awful father-son relationships, Peter trying to bond with Francis was another pretty good deed in our eyes. Peter was never the perfect father, not even in the earlier seasons, but when you consider his upbringing, some of those struggles are more understandable. Peter's adoptive dad, Francis Griffin, is a pretty awful guy. He's bitter, judgmental, incredibly unsupportive of his son, and downright mean all around.
So you can take this shiny watch and shove it.
When Peter was a kid, he even had to run a father-son race with a stalk of corn. But nonetheless, Peter genuinely loves his dad and tries his best to bond with him. In the episode, Holy Crap! He takes his dad to a ball game, complete with a special message on the scoreboard, breaks him out of jail, and helps him get a job at the toy factory. Though, perhaps most impressively, he manages to enlist the help of the Pope to try and build them a father-son bond, and this is after Francis had betrayed Peter by firing him, despite the fact that, again, Peter was the one who got Francis the job in the first place. Francis is a total jerk, both as a person and a father, but that makes Peter's continued love and devotion to both his own family and his father that much more impressive. As far as romantic gestures go, turning down $1 million to marry Lois is pretty high up there. The way this episode starts, you'd think it would belong in the other half of this video. Peter flakes on Lois's anniversary celebration so he can spend the day golfing instead. After he's struck by lightning and has a reunion with Death, who warns him that his marriage is in jeopardy, Peter's reminded of how he met and fell in love with Lois in the first place, and how passionate he was about her. This included him turning down a check of $1 million from Carter, who didn't approve of their relationship, showing that no amount of money was enough to make Peter abandon his one true love. Considering how greedy Peter can oftentimes be, that's pretty darn impressive. Reminded now of his passion for Lois, Peter convinces Death to get Peter Frampton to play a song for Lois as an anniversary gift, showing that he'd learned his lesson and that Lois meant more to him than anything else. Taking Brian in was another before the series deed that paints Peter's friendship with Brian in a new light. In Brian, Portrait of a Dog, it's revealed that Peter took him in from the streets. He was a homeless stray struggling to make ends meet when Peter felt empathy for him and took him home to become part of his family. This is sweet in and of itself, and it's even more selfless when you consider that, since Brian has all the cognitive capabilities of a human in the Family Guy world, this was basically the equivalent of Peter taking in a homeless man off the streets. Ever since, the two have become best friends, and while they aren't perfect to each other, at the end of the day, they're always there for each other. Some examples being Brian offering to give Peter one of his kidneys, a transfer which would kill him, and Peter vouching for Brian in court so that he'd be able to keep his children. Even later on in the same episode, Peter saves Brian's life when he's threatened with lethal injection, one of many testaments to their bond. It's clear that this selfless deed had a huge impact on both of their lives, which gains it a lot of points. Peter standing up for immigrant workers is up next, and it's just inside our top 5. Peter becomes a patriot, and this newfound passion leads to him urging his boss Angela to perform background checks on the brewery's employees to ensure none of them are illegal immigrants.
They are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take them away!
However, this backfires when Peter's mother reveals that
Peter himself was an illegal immigrant?
Yeah, well, having been born in Mexico, Peter technically was not an American citizen, so Peter ends up fired thanks to his own scheme. But this development has a happy ending. When Lois convinces Carter to hire him as a servant at his mansion, alongside many other immigrant employees, Peter realizes just how tough life is on them, so he helps his fellow Mexicans to stand up against Carter, demanding better conditions and general respect. When Carter offers to pay Peter off by renewing his citizenship, Peter refuses the offer unless he gives all his co-workers citizenship. Unfortunately, Carter refuses to compromise, and Peter's new friend Gerardo insists that Peter take the offer. While it didn't fully work out, and yes, he did more or less get himself into this, Peter striving to help his fellow Mexican immigrants is incredibly admirable, as he was even willing to potentially give up his own citizenship to give them all a fair chance. This is an example of Peter truly learning his lesson and becoming a better person through his experiences and mistakes, and it's easily one of his most genuinely respectable moments. We're moving from Peter Griffin to Lando Griffin for our next entry. When James Woods High has an outbreak of drug use known as toad licking, because that's quite literally what it is, Peter goes undercover as new kid in town, Lando Griffin, at the school.
I'm the new kid in town, Lando Griffin.
Another common trend with Peter's character is that oftentimes his wacky schemes come paired with the best of intentions, and this is one of those times when he actually knew what he was doing. By befriending the popular kids and convincing them to stop toad licking for good, with a pretty snazzy musical number, no less, Peter succeeded in making Meg's school a better and safer place, even sacrificing his chance to finally be a popular kid by going to the school dance with prom queen Connie D'Amico to declare his love for Meg and thereby boost her social status. We place this good deed close to the top because Peter did this out of the kindness of his heart and genuine concern for his children, and when he's tempted to do things selfishly, he goes back on it and makes sure his daughter is happy above all else. We're really gonna miss that side of Peter later on. If there's one place every kid in the USA wants to go to, it's Disney World, so taking Stewie to Disney World and saving him is worth some big parenting points. In the courtship of Stewie's father, Peter and Stewie share some quality bonding time in rather unconventional ways. We'll get to that later. But when Stewie being punished by Lois leads to a rift in his newfound love for the Fat Man, Peter makes up for this by taking him to Disney World.
Disney World! Disney World! Disney World!
A sweet gesture by itself, but it gets better. Chaos ensues when Stewie gets lost, trapped, and forced to sing in the It's a Tiny World ride, but Peter rescues him, as well as a bunch of multicultural slave children who are also trapped. He defied death through multiple attractions of the park and even won a fierce battle against Michael Eisner. That takes guts and a lot of heart. Peter may be far from a perfect dad, but moments like these make us like to believe that he's got a heart of gold. This may seem like an odd deed to place quite this high, but think about it. Peter not only took his baby to Disney World, but he also saved him from certain doom and at least 30 other children who had also been captured for who knows how long. We'd say this is Peter's most fatherly deed of all, and one of his most selfless too. Taking a close second is Peter saving a man's life from a fire. For a normal person, growing a mustache wouldn't be a cause to risk your life to save someone. For Peter, it's all the motivation he needs. When mistaken for a firefighter, Peter takes the role surprisingly seriously, and when there's a major fire at the local McBurger town, he comes in clutch and saves the owner's life, losing his mustache in the process, which he put a lot of effort into. What makes this deed have such a high position on our list is that it's an extremely altruistic deed on Peter's part. He doesn't know the man at all, and he doesn't expect anything in return, though he's rewarded with free burgers, but he does this out of the kindness of his own heart, and the desire to genuinely save someone in need. That is a tough one to beat, but at the very top of our list of Peter's good deeds, it has to be the time Peter offered to take a bullet for Lois. As far as it's fallen in recent years, Peter and Lois originally had a very loving, albeit flawed, marriage. In There's Something About Polly, Peter shows some issues with listening to Lois when it comes to important decisions, and this ultimately results in him getting involved with the mafia, of course. When Lois disapproves of his friendship with a man called Big Fat Polly, the result is Polly placing a hit on Lois, so that he won't have to abandon Peter. Peter somehow continues to make this worse and worse, but he ultimately redeems himself when face to face with the hitman. Peter asks the Don to do him a favor on the day of his daughter's wedding by shooting him instead of Lois. The Don thankfully calls off the hit altogether, so nobody has to die, but for all his mistakes leading up to it, Peter's willingness to die for his wife's sake is incredibly noble and sweet. Let's cherish that side of their relationship while it lasts, and with that, Peter cements himself as a family guy. But for all the things he positively positively does to make us laugh, there are things he negatively does to make us cry, or at least feel incredibly frustrated. Let's get into the bad deeds. First up is Peter becoming arrogant after liposuction. While Peter was a nicer and overall more moral person in the earlier Family Guy seasons, he still had his moments back then too. And this episode was one of his worst appearances. When Chris becomes insecure about his weight, Peter helps him exercise and even offers to buy him liposuction, but when Chris decides he'd rather lose weight through exercise and dieting, Peter gets some liposuction himself, and plastic surgery becomes his new habit.
She's right, Lois. Plastic surgery is great!
Eventually, Peter becomes a chiseled hunk, which gives him more than a little bit of an ego. He starts to treat his own family as inferior, particularly Chris. When the Quahog Beautiful People's Club excludes him, Peter totally bails on him, despite taking him there in the first place to encourage him. To Peter's credit, he does apologize to his family after crashing into a tub of lard and returning to his normal self, despite not exactly knowing what he'd learned. And as rude as Peter was, hey, at least he didn't kill anyone nor commit any crimes in general. That's something, at least, for now. Lying about being a single dad is up next. Peter isn't always the most honest guy around. In Single White Dad, Peter has to take care of Stewie while running errands around Quahog due to Lois's broken foot, and the women of the town mistake him for a single father. Relishing in the attention, Peter keeps the charade up, to the point where another woman begins coming on to him. Peter seemed relatively unaware of this, even saying they only kept up the charade for free popcorn.
Maybe take out the popcorn machine? Let me touch all the buttons?
He still willingly deceived the people of Quahog and took advantage of their good nature. But again, at least he didn't outright hurt anyone here. We'd gladly support Peter if he ever decided to transition, but just pretending to be transgender wasn't cool. When Peter uses the transgender bathroom at a baseball game out of urgency, it's the greatest he's ever used. And when he finds out the next day that there are benefits at work for transgender people, he keeps up the charade that he's trans despite having no intention to actually transition. It's a pretty nasty thing to do, but while we won't defend Peter's actions here, this is honestly one of the less harmful things he's done by a pretty good margin. He also did feel remorse when Ida rightfully called him out on it.
I deserve what happened to me.
As selfish as it was, at least Peter learned his lesson, and in the end, you guessed it, nobody was harmed. We'll certainly miss being able to say that later on, so deal with it now. Peter has enacted his fair share of ludicrous financial schemes, but selling Meg to Mort was something else, even by his standards. Peter's spending habits once again go out of control when he blows up his tab at Mort Goldman's pharmacy. In order to pay off his debt, he has one of his more immoral schemes, selling Meg to the Goldman family, whose son has been stalking Meg for a while to make things worse.
What if I sold you my daughter?
Huh?
Peter's essentially enslaving his daughter to the family of a boy who stalks and harasses her to get out of a mess that he got himself into. And before you claim ignorance, the fact that Peter's sales pitch to Mort is that he'll let Neil date her shows that he's definitely aware of it, at least on some level. This isn't ranked as any worse because when Meg goes through with it of her own volition and the Goldmans mistreat her, Peter actually does a lot to help her out of it, even coming up with a plan to have Lois seduce Neil to have him cheat on Meg, thus violating their contract. Still, the fact that he was willing to even consider this is pretty awful in and of itself, so it's certainly worth a mention. We'd feel wrong not to include the chicken feud. Quite possibly the most iconic running gag in the entire series, Peter and his chicken have had beef? Poultry? Since way back in season 2. We feel the need to mention that this all started because Ernie the giant chicken gave Peter an expired coupon. Not only was this likely not malicious on Ernie's part, but even if it were, it's far from a valid excuse to have a brawl across the town that causes mass property damage and uses intense violence. Add on the fact that this rivalry has been going on for over 20 years in our time at least, and you've got one of Peter's most hilarious but petty deeds. But at least Ernie seems to reciprocate the grudge, so we can't exactly pin it all on Peter. Now let's join Peter and Stewie for the classic father-son activity of bullying Lois. Going back to the episode, The Courtship of Stewie's Father, when Peter struggles to find an activity both he and Stewie can enjoy, the answer hits him right on the head. Or rather, it hits Lois. After Stewie cracks up at Peter accidentally dropping canned foods on Lois's head, Peter takes the hint and keeps the fun going, harassing Lois throughout the rest of the day. This culminates in the two knocking Lois into the back of the car, then pushing the car into a river.
When I said bond with Stewie, this is not what I had in mind.
It's only not higher because, like some of these other bad deeds, Peter actually meant well here. He only wanted to bond with Stewie, which was a request from Lois herself, and Peter actually showed concern when he realized she might not be able to get out. I mean, it doesn't excuse straight up bullying his wife, but he at least meant well. You'll find this is a running theme in the earlier Family Guy seasons, even at most of Peter's worst moments. When you're as reckless and somehow ignorant as Peter is, good intentions are worth a lot in a discussion of morals, so we put this rather low. Peter's two great loves of manslaughter and property damage converge when he blows up the Quahog Bridge. Only Peter could mistakenly befriend and ultimately aid a terrorist organization. When revisiting this episode, we almost put his friendship with Muhammad in Turban Cowboy in the good category. After all, he went into it with good intentions, genuinely enjoying the company of his new friend, learning all about a new culture, and having no clue of the nefarious intentions at play. He even helps to thwart the plot to blow up the Quahog Bridge, despite the great danger. Unfortunately, what knocks this down to the other side is the very end of the episode, at which point Peter accidentally presses the remote that blows up the Quahog Bridge. Peter and company then flee the scene immediately, an even stranger decision considering Joe was literally right there, and he's a cop. Though it's not like Peter did this maliciously, which at least keeps us from putting it any higher. But he still likely killed many people here with very minimal concern. And I know what you're thinking, but no, it won't be the last time he unintentionally blows something up. Burning Jerome's house down was not cool, and not just because it was a fire. Missing Cleveland while he's in Stool Bend, Peter, Joe, and Quagmire decided to befriend a new guy at the bar named Jerome to fill the token black friend slot in the friend group. While Jerome is perfectly nice and hits it off with the group pretty well, things quickly go south when Peter learns that he's an ex-boyfriend of Lois's. When Peter drunkenly throws a beer bottle through his window out of rage, he ends up accidentally burning the poor guy's house down. Although Peter didn't mean to go this far, we're putting this pretty high because this is one of the few misdeeds on the list Peter never actually apologized for. He let his jealousy lead him to hurt someone who'd been nothing but kind to him, and honestly, he should count himself lucky that Jerome wants anything to do with him after this. Another example of Peter's wild jealousy is him sabotaging Wild West's campaign, for instance. When the town of Quahog needs a new mayor, Peter endorses Wild West, the cousin of former Mayor Adam West. Rest in peace, by the way. But things turn south when Lois grows attracted to Wild West and calls his name in bed. Peter turns on Wild West immediately, trying his best to sabotage his campaign. This leads to him not only burning down a library and nearly killing Elle in the process, but arguably even worse, he tries to cut off Wild West's incredible mustache. That's just too far, man. We get Peter's frustration, but this was a Lois issue, and it should have stayed between Peter and her, rather than betraying a friend who'd done him no wrong. At least Peter apologized in the end, but only after West gave him some pet baby mustaches as a gift. Man, what a nice dude. If only we could say the same about Peter nowadays. Peter becoming a bully is up next. When Chris is being bullied at school by a boy named Kyle, Peter wants to chat with him to try and smooth things out. But while he initially had good intentions here, things quickly went south when he lost his temper and beat Kyle up. After apologizing, Peter realizes he actually likes bullying and starts to torment the whole town, including, and not limited to, his own family and children. Chris ends up standing up to Peter, showing him the error of his ways, but the sheer delight Peter took in becoming Quahog's stereotypical bully is nonetheless concerning. They say winning the lottery changes people, but unlike Peter, most people wouldn't end up shooting their own best friends. So yeah, Peter shooting his best friends is up next. One of many lessons one should learn about Peter is that he shouldn't be trusted with excessive wealth. We see a great example of why in Lottery Fever, in which the Griffins manage to win the lottery, and Peter's newfound status as the rich friend goes to his head really quickly. He begins abusing his friends, forcing them to do humiliating, painful, and downright lethal things for his amusement. This culminates in Peter shooting Joe in the eye and Quagmire in the throat.
Go to hell, Peter! We don't need your money!
It wasn't for any specific reason, or some horrible accident or anything, it's just a relatively rare instance of Peter being fully malicious. Plus, he only apologizes after the Griffins have lost everything. When Quagmire is the morally decent one, you know you've failed. Now let's talk about the time Peter cheated on Lois. Hey, remember the good deed we mentioned where Peter refused to cheat on Lois? Good times, right? In the episode Call Girl, Peter's shenanigans get the Griffins into deep financial trouble once again. This time, however, it's Lois who tries to fix it by working a job as a phone sex worker. When a sexually frustrated Peter begins calling her, he grows infatuated with Classy and asks to meet up, essentially showcasing that he was willing to cheat on Lois. If nothing else, Peter technically didn't cheat on Lois, as of course Classy is Lois, but the willingness was still there. When Lois rightfully calls Peter out on his unfaithfulness, Peter insists that something deep inside him knew it was her, and that, at the end of the day, he'd gotten to fall in love with her again. While that's kinda sweet in theory, we don't buy the whole knowing it was Lois thing, considering that he said a heartfelt goodbye to her and his kids, showing that as far as he knew, he was consciously and willingly cheating on his wife. It's downright sad how far their marriage has fallen by this point. Peter's done some nasty stuff, but he really broke bad when he became a meth cook. This wouldn't be the only time Peter has done something immoral immoral or dangerous to provide for his family, but it might have gone the most wrong. When the Griffins move to a farm to get out of Quahog due to the rising crime rates, they end up in financial trouble, but a meth lab in the basement gives Peter an idea. Peter becomes a meth dealer, which is bad in and of itself, but Peter becomes significantly more violent and money-hungry, peddling much more than the family needs to survive. This is truly the exact moment Peter Griffin became Heisenberg, and honestly, had he not blown up their new house by accident, he may well have been even more dangerous. But hey, at least here he's enabling drug addicts for the sake of his family, unlike Peter encouraging AA members to drink, which was just for fun. When Peter and Brian are forced to join Alcoholics Anonymous in Friends of Peter G, they quickly grow bored of their fellow alcoholics doing annoying things like venting about their issues. This alone shows a complete lack of empathy on Peter's part, but it only gets worse when Peter brings alcohol to a meeting and encourages these recovering alcoholics to drink. The sheer lack of compassion combined with the fact that Peter literally only did this out of boredom is baffling, and had he not been given a second chance by death, he'd have died because of it. The only reason this isn't even higher is that the whole encouraging them to drink thing was actually Brian's idea, but Peter is still just startlingly heartless here. He shows absolutely no empathy for anyone here. We get that Peter doesn't care about his own drinking problem, but that's no excuse to keep others from trying to better their lives. Not cool, Peter. Not cool at all. Peter may not have cared for the godfather, but you'd never be able to tell by the time he became a mobster. When Joe asks Peter to be his daughter's godfather for her christening, he takes the role a bit too literally. He goes from cosplaying as a stereotypical mob boss to somehow becoming one. Resultingly, he uses his newfound power to intimidate the citizens of Quahog and go on crime spree, examples being robbing Mort Goldman's pharmacy and literally killing Brian for drinking his last cream soda. He does ultimately help Joe to take down the mafia once he realizes he and his family are in danger, but Peter didn't have any such concerns until it affected him, so we can't really give him too many points for that. There are some despicable deeds on this list, but few feel quite as cold as Peter admitting he doesn't like his kids. When a successful April Fool's Day prank by Tom and Diane at the Quahog News has the town convinced the end of the world is coming, Peter admits in his assumedly final moments that while he does love Lois, he dislikes being around his kids.
I just hate being around the kids.
What?
Most of the time, we can defend Peter's poor parenting, emphasis on most of the time, by chalking it up to ignorance or laziness. But here, Peter just flat out admits that he doesn't like his own children. This very well may be the exact moment Peter Griffin starts to feel like a completely different character. The once golden-hearted dummy who genuinely loved his family here openly demonstrates that he blatantly doesn't like them. While he does try to connect with his kids throughout the remainder of the episode, he ultimately fails and buys them off with an Xbox, which, albeit hilarious, is still just really sad. What happened to you, man? But don't worry, Peter really loved his kids when he tried to marry Chris. And no, surprisingly, it wasn't Herbert in a Peter costume, though we wouldn't put it past him. In Fresh Air, one of the most infamous episodes in Family Guy history, mind you, Peter showcases the absolute worst of both his neglect as a parent and his general greed. When Carter names Chris the sole heir of the Peter Schmidt fortune, as he actually enjoys spending time with him without asking for money, Peter attempts to marry him, his own son, Chris, to get the money. Ignoring the obvious and utterly revolting factor of marrying his own child, Peter is also manipulating him, tricking Chris into thinking this was just so they could be best friends and spend time together. They ultimately back out of it, thankfully, but there's utterly no justification for even just neglecting Chris to the point where he is remotely okay with this. Taking the bronze medal of evil deeds is blowing up a children's hospital, which, to be honest, seems like something the lovable Family Guy would never do, but in Tales of a Third Grade Nothing, Peter makes one of his greatest blunders. Upon trying to blow up a competing brewery's billboard to get him closer to a promotion, Peter mistakenly blows up a children's hospital right next to it. Later in the episode, Angela reveals that Peter killed 19 children in this mishap. Peter shows very minimal concern about the whole ordeal. While he is initially horrified by the disaster, when the sign catches fire as intended, he immediately calms down and seemingly forgets it until the end of the episode, where he's genuinely surprised that he's facing legal consequences for it. Had this been intentional, it easily would have been at the very top of our list. On the other hand, as horrible as this is, and really, Peter absolutely should have seen the obvious danger here, it was a complete freak accident on his part. And he was genuinely horrified at what happened, even if only for a moment. But by accident or not, he still killed 19 children here, so this really has to be placed near the very top of our list. In an extremely close second is Peter's favorite activity, bullying Meg. In the earlier seasons of the show, Peter and Meg had a relatively sweet relationship. He would tease her often, sure, but there was always a more playful and well-intentioned vibe to it. That has all flown out the window over the years, however. From chasing her with his farts to constantly insulting and abusing her both emotionally and physically. Heck, we know we said no cutaways, but there was even that time he shot her in one. Peter has shown time and time again that he sees his daughter as a punching bag and almost never shows remorse for it. Sure, there are moments where Peter sticks up for Meg and is even nice to her, but the fact that a few isolated incidents of Peter caring for his daughter are even worth mentioning as notable good deeds is a testament to how much of an awful dad Peter has become to Meg.
Shut up, Meg.
The family guy we know and love would never treat his own daughter so cruelly, so routinely, and the only reason we aren't giving it the very top spot is that he at least occasionally shows care for Meg. It's nowhere near enough to redeem him, but it's something, at least. You may not have expected blowing up hospitals to be a running theme on this list, but here we are. Our pick for Peter Griffin's worst deed is the time he blew up a hospital and its vaccines. The episode Hot Shots has Peter and Lois become anti-vaxxers. There are only so many ways this could turn out, but Peter still goes above and beyond by blowing up a hospital in Quahog to destroy all the vaccines in town. In contrast to Peter's earlier blowing up of the Children's Hospital, this was done with the intent of destruction and absolutely no concern for the many patients therein. He doesn't stop until every last bit of the building is destroyed, and what's worse is that it's likely not even the only place he blew up, since he claimed to have destroyed all the vaccines in town, so he probably had a few other stops too. He shows no remorse, and it's not even something noteworthy enough to be brought up again. It has to be the most chaotic, evil thing Peter has ever done, and to him, this was just another thing to check off his to-do list. His complete nonchalance about having caused so much damage and ending so much human life makes it a surefire choice for the worst thing Peter Griffin has ever done.
Lois Griffin has earned her place as one of the most well-known mothers in animation. She's gone through a lot of changes, and we've been able to see the best and worst sides of her.
Lois once killed a woman.
But out of all the things Lois has done, which has been the best and which was the worst? Hey guys, I'm Brad with Wicked Binge, and these are Lois Griffin deeds, good to evil. Let's start with Lois's good deeds, kind and even heroic acts that Lois is responsible for, starting with some good and working our way towards the most noble. Our first spot on this list goes to helping Brian. Of all the members of the Griffin family, Brian was always someone Lois would go to for advice. In the first few seasons, they had a really close friendship. Despite Brian claiming his best friend is Peter, it's easy to say that Lois could take that title. Lois and Brian could have conflicting views, but she called him on his bad behavior. When she felt that Brian was being brainwashed by Rush Limbaugh, Lois showed how determined Brian was to always be on the losing end of things, calling him a contrarian.
I think you just gotta be in the out group.
And regardless of your political beliefs, Lois had a point. When Brian was upset with Peter for giving Jillian the idea to move in together, Lois defended it. She said that if Brian didn't want the same things Jillian did, then he should end the relationship. When Brian went a trip to Martha's Vineyard to present his speech, Lois had been the only one to show up and show him support. When he had an accident in the middle of the grocery store, Lois tied her sweater around him and led Brian out to the car. She may not have stayed the nurturing and patient friend that she had been in early episodes, but we still have to give credit to Lois for calling out Brian when he was being ridiculous and hearing him out when he needed to vent. Next is supporting her brother and sister. When Lois came across a family photo that had Patrick in it, she tried to do the right thing by freeing him from the Brookfield Insane Asylum. This would not be a good idea, but we can see why Lois assumed that her parents just sent Patrick away, due to him just being an inconvenience. When she found out that Patrick was killing people, Lois didn't call the police like she should have, but she did at least try to stop Patrick by reaching out to him. And though she had to have him recommitted, she showed a lot of regret.
Patrick, you're my brother and I love you.
She and Patrick didn't know each other long, but she wanted to be there for him. As for Lois's sister Carol, she needed help in a different way. Carol suffered from low self-esteem, which led her to rushing into relationships and getting a broken heart when those marriages didn't work. Having all of Carol's exes show up to Adam West's home to remind Carol of her mistakes was overkill, but we understand that it came from a well-meaning place. Lois didn't believe that Carol would be able to handle the trauma of another failed relationship, and so did what she could to help. Luckily, Lois was able to amend her mistake and be more supportive. taking the bronze medal of her most heroic deed is stopping Bonnie. While Lois is guilty of being unfaithful to Peter, we still have to commend how far she went to stop Bonnie from leaving Joe. Lois had been unhappy to hear that Bonnie was only traveling for the sake of having an affair far from home, where she wouldn't be caught. But upon hearing that Bonnie was seriously considering leaving her husband and daughter behind, Lois made the choice to call Joe. Throughout the episode, Lois was trying to convince Bonnie to not go through with it. It wasn't until Bonnie claimed she didn't have much reason to go back home that Lois called Joe to convince Bonnie to return to Quahog. Lois got involved again when Bonnie and Joe almost split after Joe's affair, which led Bonnie to the strip club where she and Joe can meet again. Lois is not the most faithful wife, so she had no business asking Joe to go to France to confront his wife. But when you break down what Lois said to get through to Bonnie, it made sense as to why she thought Joe and Bonnie staying together was the best option. Every time Bonnie brought up having an affair or leaving her husband, Lois would mention their daughter, Susie. During a conversation in an earlier episode, when Peter and Lois's marriage was being revealed as highly dysfunctional, Lois made the comment that they needed to get Stewie to college and that was it.
It is what it is. Let's just get Stewie to college and go from there.
Lois has been taught that having two parents that detest each other was better than having parents that were split up. It's a warped view, and Lois did not have the qualifications to help anyone with their marriage. But this motivation and viewpoint explains why she felt the need to get involved. The silver medal goes to trying to help the city. After swimming in a contaminated lake, Lois confronted Mayor West. When she saw that he wasn't motivated to change where the oil companies spilled their waste, Lois runs for mayor to change things. Unfortunately, it didn't work out and she turned the position back over to Mayor West.
You can have your job back.
She stopped it when they tried to resume the dumping, but they just wanted someone in office that would play ball, which Mayor West said he would do. Lois didn't stop there though, and would run for another office, a place on the school board. Initially, she'd been facing off against another woman before running unopposed. But after seeing a teacher, Mr. Fargus, toss eggs of an endangered species off of the roof of the school, Lois supported the choice to let Fargus go. Peter, who got Fargus off his medication, demanded Lois rehire the old teacher. This was another race that Lois didn't win, but it was a good attempt before Peter sabotaged her. In a recent episode, Lois disagreed with the choice to elect Wild West as mayor, just because he was related to Adam. She showed her support towards the local librarian running for office, driving home the point to the community that they should vote for someone with a good platform rather than someone with a familiar family name. Again, she was unsuccessful, but we appreciate the effort. The gold medal goes to calling out Peter. Lois is far from a model citizen or mother of the year, but her husband Peter is on another level of neglect. Some of the best and most memorable moments involving Lois are times when she presses Peter to be a better husband and father. When Peter got liposuction and hurt Chris's self-esteem,
Don't look at me, I'm hideous,
made a bar in the basement to avoid the family, knocked out the television but let Meg take the fall, Lois pointed out when Peter messed up. She always got on his case for not being a good role model and not trying to get to know his children. After Peter beat up a neighbor's child that had been bullying Chris, Lois demanded he go and apologize. When Peter decided he liked being a bully and in control of his friends and neighbors, Lois made Peter realize he was being the same terror that made his own childhood so awful. When everyone was tricked by the news station's April Fool's prank, Peter revealed that he hated being around his children.
I just hate being around the kids.
Afterwards, Meg, Chris, and Stewie avoided him because they were upset. Lois supported them expressing their anger, telling Peter that if he couldn't connect with them, then that was his issue, not theirs. After Peter and Meg came back from a trip, Lois tried to get Meg to think about her future rather than focusing on a good relationship with Peter. She knew that going to Peter to get him to stop was useless, and so had to confront Meg directly. It was a shame that Lois knew Peter would be more concerned with being Meg's friend than thinking about her future, but at least Lois knew how to approach the issue. We've already established that Lois is not the best mother or wife. The more the show goes on, the more evident this becomes. But in the initial episodes, Lois used her anger and her manipulation tactics to protect her children and support her family, rather than tear them down. Now let's flip to the other end of the spectrum and look at Lois's evil deeds, starting with the least offensive and working our way towards the most disgraceful. The least evil deed is going on the run. Lois becomes a kleptomaniac. She started small, stealing shirts and jewelry before moving on to valuable paintings. Her need to push the limits of what she can get away with eventually led to her getting arrested. But the mess that happened after is what earned this as one of her worst actions. After the family visited her in jail, Lois went along with a poorly put together plan to break her out. The Griffins were forced to leave everything behind and start over in Chinatown, making new lives while hiding from police. Though Lois had made a horrified comment at their predicament as they were fleeing from the prison, she adapted and accepted that her family was going to be in hiding with her, all because she couldn't control her impulses. Standing at the window to watch for police in shifts, being forced in a small apartment, and getting by with the bare minimum,
Chris, I'm hungry. It's your turn to keep watch for the cops.
Lois was fine putting her family through it if it meant she could be with them and out of jail. It wasn't until they were running through the sewers to get away from Joe and the rest of the police that Lois finally had her revelation that none of this was okay. And if you think we're being too harsh about ranking this as one of the worst deeds, we would like to point out that Lois nearly got a lenient sentence until she tried stealing the judge's gavel, proving she had little to no control over herself. Next is Lois's mini violent outburst. When Lois punches somebody out for attacking her husband, she's initially horrified and wants nothing to do with it. Lois has said she didn't support any kind of violence.
Oh no, I do not condone violence.
But anytime she was given a chance to take up an aggressive sport or hobby, Lois was always the one to take things too far. She used her karate to brawl with tourists, she lashed out at Peter, and encouraged the family to let out their pent-up anger by nearly killing each other. She excelled at boxing, just because she focused all the anger she had towards Peter on her opponents. The ongoing trend with such episodes is always Lois's hatred of Peter and the things he does. Rather than deal with these issues in a healthy way like counseling or getting a divorce, Lois instead channeled her aggression into fighting. The bronze medal goes to the abuse of her children. In the first few seasons, Lois wasn't the best mom.
I'm not the perfect mother. Who is?
But she was at least trying to help her children. She tried to get Meg out of her shell, she supported Chris, and she tackled a dog to save Stewie's favorite bear. But the more the show progressed, the more Lois's mothering changed for the worse. She started insulting her kids, giving them nicknames like Dum Dum or Big Head. She attempted to steal Meg's boyfriend because Peter was making her insecure. She manipulated Meg to do things she didn't want to do, like taking care of Joe while Bonnie was out of town. When she took Meg to spring break, Lois not only spent the time neglecting her daughter, but she slips how Meg became an accident. When Chris was upset, Lois asked him if he planned to kill himself, saying that it would make her look like a bad mother if he did, only for her to quickly come up with a plan of how to redeem her image, saying that she would spin it to seem it was a miracle he lasted as long as he did. When Dr. Hartman estimated that Stewie would be shorter than expected, Lois then asked if Stewie would also die at a young age, looking optimistic.
I mean, I suppose it's fine if he's gonna die at 14.
When Carter was temporarily blind and asked Lois to look after him, Lois insisted that Stewie needed her, hitting him to make him cry. Stewie says she does this a lot. Lois was also proven that she could be just as neglectful as Peter after he tried pinning Stewie's injuries on her. When Lois found Stewie under the car, she became frantic. Instead of insisting to rush Stewie to the hospital, she pleaded with Peter to help her hide the crime until they could pin it on someone else. This was the same thing the rest of the family had done for the majority of the episode, but there was something especially unsettling with how quickly Lois came up with that plan. The silver medal goes to throwing out her whole family. After making the entire family go on a cleaning spree, Lois is happy for a little while. Soon, she goes further and further with throwing everything away and minimizing everything in her life. When Peter began acting like a nuisance, tracking sand and crabs in the bed, Lois kicks him out of the house as he wasn't bringing her joy. The first part is an overreaction, with Lois stating that it was what the book said she should do. Considering Peter and Lois's relationship in later episodes, it would make sense that Lois would come to the conclusion that Peter no longer makes her happy.
We're not exactly the model of a healthy marriage.
In fact, they nearly go their separate ways in several episodes, only to make up in the last 5 minutes. However, the reason we're placing this as one of Lois's most evil actions is because she doesn't stop at Peter. Soon, everything bothers her. She took away Meg's glasses because they were cluttering up her face. She drags Stewie's time machine down the stairs and lays into her kids, thinking that they were hiding science fair projects in Stewie's bedroom. Lois was so focused being on the warpath, she didn't even notice the jumps through time caused by her handling a piece of technology she was not qualified to deal with. What followed was Lois throwing everyone else out of the house one by one, even Stewie, who claimed he was only kicked out for using his diaper. After Lois was finally alone in an empty house, she spiraled further. She didn't understand why she wasn't happy after getting rid of everything, and only snapped out of her obsessive state when she was saved by a bunch of garbage. The episode showed how close Lois was to the edge, and how she took the smallest things and turned them into a mess that nearly destroyed her family. It's what viewers would expect from Peter, but with Lois, it was more unsettling. Peter would get wrapped up in something and not even realize how his family was affected by his actions. But Lois knew what she was doing. When everyone voiced their concerns, Lois responded by saying it wasn't bringing her joy and therefore not important. Finally, the gold medal of most evil goes to committing murder. That's right, Lois has indeed been confirmed to have committed a couple of murders throughout the show. Chris had pointed out that Lois ran over a pedestrian, to which no one really responded. When Chris was at a daze after being traumatized by the death of Arthur Valentine, Lois confessed to killing someone.
I killed a jaywalker in 2002.
When Peter had a harmonica stuck in him, Lois had come home and confessed to finding a child under her car, which led to her fleeing and riding a train far south until she felt it was safe to return home. In a more recent episode, Lois became obsessed with being dubbed the Customer of the Week at a local coffee shop. To get the title and her photo on the wall, she spends hundreds of dollars on a painting one of the employees did. After Chris suggested she save one of the employees' lives, Lois formulated a plan to target one of the baristas using a small packet of peanuts. Lois then waited for the young woman to have a reaction, not anticipating that she would be able to drive just far enough to get into a major wreck. In an effort to hide the now attempted murder, Lois then kidnapped another employee and held his roommates hostage before she was eventually caught, all while repeating that she was a kind and loving person who didn't do these sort of things.
I'm a good person, Joe.
Oh, hey there, Chris. Happy Valentine's Day.
Almost certainly Peter Griffin's favorite child, Chris Griffin is a lovable, if slightly unstable kid who's had relationship experience beyond his years. But being both a young teenage boy and a resident of Quahog, that makes a chaotic combo as far as love is concerned, from high school bullies to substitute teachers to Taylor Swift. Hey guys, I'm Brad with Wicked Binge, and these are Chris Griffin's love interest, healthy to toxic to disturbing. Be sure to lock your closet doors so the evil monkey doesn't get you. We're kicking off the healthy relationships. Taking our gold medal of health is Sam. Debuting in the episode To Live and Die in Dixie, Sam is Chris's first major love interest. They hit it off and enjoy wholesome childhood activities like skipping stones, poking dead bodies with a stick, and what? Well, the point is they get along well. But when Sam kisses Chris, Chris is horrified, thinking that Sam is a boy due to her tomboyish appearance. Even this doesn't deter their friendship though, and when Chris discovers she's a girl, he's more than happy to pursue a relationship.
You're a girl?
Of course I am.
Sam is equally willing, not minding Chris's extreme awkwardness and even encouraging him to just talk to her like she's a boy. Sadly, they part ways when the Griffins move back to Quahog, but they promise to keep in touch. Maybe we'll see Sam again one day. There's definitely a spark between these two, and she's easily the healthiest relationship Chris has ever had. For our next entry, we're going from the south to the south of the border to visit Isabella. Though their meeting was rather awkward, consisting of her confronting Chris for stealing her bikini top at a local pool, this sweet immigrant from Mexico made good company for Chris. They hit it off and bond naturally, with Chris not being swayed by the fact that she has 2 babies. When it comes out that Isabella is being deported, she entrusts the kids to Chris, and despite Lois's reservations, he does a great job taking care of them, even protecting them from coyotes later on when the Griffins head to Mexico to try and get Isabella out. Sadly, Chris decides to part ways with Isabella, realizing that although he's able to take care of babies when push comes to shove, he's not ready for it.
I'm too young to be taking on this much responsibility.
But the split was amicable, and the whole ordeal showed the best parts of Chris's character, except for the whole stealing her bikini top thing, which is practically the only reason it isn't number 1. But hey, the teenage years are the season for awkwardness. Just look at Chris's time with Barbara, one of his first crushes in the series. She appears in To Love and Die in Dixie, and seems to be on pretty friendly terms with Chris. She invites him to her birthday party and enjoys his sense of humor. Chris likes her enough to work a paper route to buy her a gift with his own own money, a nice bottle of perfume, which he sprays right into her eye, immediately ruining his chances with her. Keep trying, Chris. You'll get it right eventually. It sure seems like you've improved since then. At least, after all, you managed to date a Tim Hortons model named Jennifer. She has quite possibly the least screen time out of anyone on our list, only appearing at the very end of the episode. Girlfriend, eh? Little's known about her, or about her relationship with Chris. All we know is that they met at camp. Peter didn't believe she existed at first, and she managed to make Chris a more thoughtful person all around, with him giving his old man some tips, much to his chagrin. After Peter calls Chris a fat loser, he eventually reveals that he's deeply insecure, because he himself was once a fat loser, and Chris, being the total sweetheart he is, accepts Peter's honestly crappy apology and pretends Jennifer doesn't exist, so his dad's ego won't be bruised further. Peter truly doesn't deserve Chris. His time with Jennifer might not be all too detailed, but it's clear they genuinely cared for each other, and ultimately, their relationship proved how much of a nice guy Chris is. Though, the fact that his first instinct on the ride home was to ask her for nudes is a little superficial, which is why she isn't any higher. Thankfully, Chris isn't all that superficial at heart. He's even an activist sometimes, like when he dated Pam. In the episode Baby Got Black, it seems like everyone's determined to find something wrong with Chris's relationship with Jerome's daughter, Pam. From Jerome refusing to allow his daughter to date a white guy, to Peter straight up asking if he minds that she's black, the world is against them. Regardless, they genuinely like each other, and despite Jerome's grievances, they want to date. Ultimately, Jerome relents and allows the relationship to continue. Like most of the relationships on this list, that's where the timeline ends. But at least things were pretty consistently okay here. Nothing special, but nothing harmful. And of course, rounding out Chris's healthy romances is that of Herbert's grandniece, Sandy. What? Who do you think we were gonna put here? We didn't see much of Sandy. She only appears in Valentine's Day in Quahog, and as an innocent crush on Chris. They enjoy some popsicles together after Herbert helps her ask Chris out.
I'm kind of a lonely old man.
Really?
But while this is sweet, we have to place this entry a little bit lower, due to the fact that Herbert gives her the exact words to say, and seems to be trying to live out his fantasy of dating Chris through her, but we'll get to him later. These next few relationships fall into a more disputable area, being neither fully healthy nor exactly toxic per se. These relationships fall in the gray area. First in this category is Luka. Chris sure has a way of winning the hearts of girls in other countries. In the episode Jungle Love, Chris joins the Peace Corps to avoid freshman hazing at James Woods High, and quickly becomes popular with the locals. He becomes especially popular with Luka, the daughter of Chief Olecki, and we can't blame her for falling for him, looking at Chris's utterly unrivaled dance skills. But while things seem innocent at first, we have to dock some points for the misunderstanding between them, which results in them being married after the aforementioned dance performance. The Griffins object to the marriage, and Chris ends up leaving once he fully realizes that he's been taking advantage of the locals to escape his own issues. It turns out this was definitely the right call, since they seemed happy to bully him too once they realized he was a freshman. Now, this video is also going to double as a relationship advice session for our viewers, so here's a big tip. Whatever you do, don't follow Peter's advice. Just look what happened with Anna. Chris met this cute veterinarian girl and fell in love with her pretty much instantly. Their relationship actually goes smoothly at first, with Chris being respectful and considerate all around. Unfortunately, in a moment of sheer brilliance, Peter advises his naive son that he's making a mistake by treating his lady as a human being.
If you want to get anywhere with a chick, you can't treat him too nice-like.
Chris takes this to heart and begins to treat Anna like absolute garbage, effectively ruining their relationship. As sad as this is, we have two reasons for not quite calling this a toxic relationship. For one, Chris does apologize to Anna, ignoring Peter's terrible advice and making amends for his mean behavior. The other reason, going hand in hand, is that Chris wasn't malicious. He just trusted his idiotic father's advice. They even go on another date at the end of the episode, showing that they're at least on decent terms. Though, since Anna hasn't shown up since, we have to wonder how that second date went, leaving her right in the middle of our list. But we certainly won't have to wonder about any second dates for the next section. These are the toxic relationships. We're kicking things off with Alyssa. Another early season's love interest, Alyssa is a young Republican club member and a right-wing activist. In a display of truly awful timing, Chris connects with her and the club, just as Mayor Adam West goes after gay marriage to distract from the scandal of using taxpayers' money to build a statue of Diggum, the Sugar Smacks frog. She uses Chris's feelings for her to rope him into the Young Republicans Club and brainwashes him into supporting Mayor West's ban. Chris isn't innocent either, though, letting Brian potentially die on his hill for the prospect of touching some boobs.
I think I'm made Brian crazy.
But at least nothing terrible happened between these two, and honestly, none of this would have happened if the town had appreciated that beautiful statue. It's actually pretty crazy how close things came to working out between Chris and Connie D'Amico, resident mean girl of James Woods High. While she's most memorable for being a constant tormentor of Meg alongside the other popular kids, in this episode, she's given a rare sympathetic role. Having pumped and dumped every remotely popular guy in the school, Connie decides to date Chris as a last resort. This is only to find out that Chris is the closest thing to a genuine guy Connie's ever known, and the two actually start to bond.
No guy's ever said anything that nice to me before.
This could have been a redemption arc for Connie. That is, had it not been for Chris screwing things up by cheating on her at a party with two other girls. Connie gets back at him by humiliating him by showing an embarrassing video to the whole school, ensuring that he won't have to worry about popularity going to his head again. But still, talk about a wasted opportunity. Moving on to Ellen. When Chris and Stewie get lost in the woods, Chris promises that he'll ask out Ellen, a girl at school who's nice to him. She also happens to have Down syndrome, leading to a very memorable musical number, and he manages to get a date with her. Unfortunately, it turns out that Ellen is only sweet on a surface level. She's actually bossy, mean, and mistreats Chris pretty badly, leading to Chris losing his temper and thereby ruining his chances with her. But honestly, the fact that Chris had the confidence to not only approach Ellen, but to stand up for himself when she turned out to be awful, speaks volumes to his character. Something looks oddly familiar about our next entry, Lindsay, but we can't put our finger on it. For some reason, we feel like she's gonna start playing the piano any second. But in any case, Lindsay is one of Chris's worst relationship endeavors. She shows practically no interest in Chris, despite his absolute love and devotion to her, and she ends up even cheating on him like it's nothing. Chris later remarks that he only dated her because she looked like his mother, which, as horrifying as that sounds, was actually just him believing that only someone as patient as Lois, who somehow stayed married to Peter, could possibly settle for Chris. If you thought any of the relationships before this were odd, remember the time Chris got a homecoming date with Taylor Swift? By far one of the nicer celebrity portrayals on the show, Taylor Swift's time with Chris Scriven was surprisingly pleasant. She was nice enough to go to homecoming with him when he couldn't find a date, and dance like an unattended fire hose with him. Unfortunately, things go south when Taylor writes a breakup song about Chris, making a meme out of him on the internet. Ultimately, she tried to do the right thing by singing about how genuinely happy she is with Chris, but her fans sadly don't like her being happy as much as her writing breakup songs.
Well, I guess they're just used to me being sad and hurt by men.
Once again being a saint, Chris cruelly dumps Taylor so she can truthfully write a breakup song and retain her career. This one is interesting in that there isn't necessarily a bad guy here. Things just didn't work out. As for why it's all the way down here, well, this episode came out in 2016, which would have made Taylor around 25 or 26, and Chris is 13. Yeah, while things were amicable between them, it's still really darn creepy. It's shocking that nobody even mentions it in the episode. He's a teenager and half her age. Maybe this wasn't as nice a betrayal as we let on. Poor Chris. If only he knew he deserved so much better, especially better than these bottom few who fall into the disturbing category. First, we have Kristen. While a newly gray-headed Peter is frolicking with Tom Tucker in hefty shades of gray, Chris is being asked out by an attractive girl named Kristen at the mall. When he shows zero interest, Brian and Stewie realize he's become so addicted to adult videos that real women don't do anything for him. So they help him overcome his problem, and eventually, he's ready for a date. Everything seems fine at first. Kristen is even nice enough to assure Chris that she and her popular friends aren't going to thrill kill them on their first date. It's oddly specific, but still, how nice of her. Though it is a strange coincidence that Chris isn't heard from again in the episode, and that there's a news article about a teen who was thrill-killed the very next morning. Crazy stuff, right? So we've got murder, and we've got creepy age gaps. Now, what if we were to combine those two into one entry? The silver medal of toxicity goes to Mrs. Lockhart. Chris's hot substitute teacher wins his heart very quickly, and she uses this to her advantage. She promises that she and Chris can run away together and get married. That is, if he helps her murder her husband.
I need you to kill my husband.
Mrs. Lockhart is a whole new level of evil compared to anyone we've discussed so far. She's a grown woman who's more than happy to manipulate a naive, mentally handicapped boy to take her husband out of the picture permanently. Thankfully, Chris didn't go through with it, but the fact that Mrs. Lockhart even put the option on the table is nothing short of horrifying. But she did go through with it by replacing her husband's breakfast with an angry live bear, showing that she was completely serious. It would should be an easy choice for the gold medal, but come on, we couldn't possibly call this list complete without mentioning Herbert the Pervert. Ever since his debut in Season 3, Herbert has had eyes for Chris, who's shown varying degrees of ignorance and no degree of interest beyond sadly viewing Herbert as a good friend.
Get your fat ass back here.
This creep does everything from watching Chris through his window to fighting an evil tree for trying to hurt his man, trying to get him to give him a bath when he acts as their babysitter, and even has a whole musical number in his head in which they are married and have kids. Chris and Herbert have never been a couple, obviously, but in Herbert's sick, twisted mind, they're star-crossed lovers. Chris just doesn't know it yet. While the youngest child of the Griffin family is known for his evil, maniacal nature, he has good moments. Stewie is a sociopath and obsessed with killing his mother, and wants to achieve world domination. Although he has more evil moments than good, Stewie's character has had more soft moments as the series has gone on. We'll be taking a look at both his good side and his evil side, as well as some of the murders he's committed throughout the series. Hey guys, I'm Brad with Wicked Binge, and these are Stewie Griffin's deeds, good to evil. Starting things off, let's take a look at some of Stewie's more courageous, noble, and selfless acts throughout the series. These are Stewie's good deeds. The gold medal of good goes to saving Brian's life. In the episode Life of Brian, when Brian was killed off after being hit by a car, Stewie was the most torn up about Brian's passing. 2 episodes later, Stewie, with the help of Vinny, goes back in time to save Brian from being hit by the car. This is the most selfless thing Stewie has done, because it was done out of the goodness of his heart and the compassion and grief for his missing friend. In the episode Mr. and Mrs. Stewie, he also stopped his girlfriend Penelope from murdering Brian, leading to a fight scene. The silver medal goes to helping Chris. There are many episodes that show Stewie helping his older brother. A good example is when Stewie helped Chris get ready for his date with a girl with Down syndrome. In the episode, Stewie performed his song Down Syndrome Girl as he got Chris ready. In the episode Secondhand Spoke, Stewie hid in Chris's backpack to help give him advice while he was at school for how to deal with his bullies. The next example is when Peter and Brian were gone trying to retrieve the Thanksgiving turkey. In Peter's absence, Stewie coached his brother on how to become the man of the house. And finally, when Stewie, along with Brian, took Chris in Stewie's time machine to see different moments throughout history to prepare him for his upcoming history test.
What's that over there?
Oh, that's Double D Day.
The bronze medal goes to comforting Brian. When Brian was tripping on mushrooms, Stewie helped him calm down. Brian even cut off his ear, and Stewie helped him stitch it back on. This is definitely one of Stewie's kinder acts. Next is saving Lois's life. Lois is held at gunpoint by news anchor Diane Simmons. Just before Lois is shot, Diane was miraculously shot by a mysterious source. It's revealed at the end that it was none other than Stewie. Oh, wait a minute, doesn't Stewie want Lois to die? Well, we have to argue that although this was an act of good, it wasn't done entirely out of selflessness like some of his other good deeds. The only reason Stewie saved Lois's life was so that he could be the one to kill her. As he stated, if anyone's gonna take that B word down, it's gonna be me. Next is destroying Superstore USA. While this isn't the best deed in the world because it caused a lot of destruction, but Stewie and Brian using a tank to destroy Superstore USA was nonetheless a good deed. In the episode, the store was using up all of the city's power. At the end, they restored the power in the city. Next is killing Bertram. This is tricky because just like killing Diane Simmons, this also involves murder. However, it was done for the greater good. In the episode The Big Bang Theory, Stewie killed his half-brother and villain of the series, Bertram. Bertram wanted to go back in time to kill Leonardo da Vinci, ultimately erasing Stewie's existence.
You're assassin, you overrated caricaturist!
However, it was shown in the beginning of the episode that Brian and Stewie created the Big Bang. Stewie had to stop Bertram from erasing all of existence. Saving the entire universe makes Stewie a hero. The last in the good section also leans more towards bad, but it was done with a good intention. It's faking Brian's death. Brian became depressed after he felt like people don't want to value a canine's life as much as a human's. Stewie puts Brian's collar on another dog and burns down a liquor store. When Brian sees how much the Griffins are upset that he's gone, he's touched by Stewie's gesture. While it may not have been great to burn down a liquor store and kill another dog, this was one of Stewie's more selfless moments because he wanted to show Brian how much his life matters. Alright, we got the good deeds out of the way. I think it's time to take a look at the longer list of Stewie's evil deeds. We're actually going to be starting with the lesser evil and working our way down to the most evil, specifically murders. First is humiliating Brian. There are a number of instances where Stewie goes out of his way to mess with Brian and humiliate him. After Brian teased Stewie about his height, Stewie got back at Brian by shrinking him, and things go south when they both shrink to microscopic size. Another good example was when Stewie kept going back in time to mess up important moments in Brian's life just to humiliate him. He even stole his peanut butter jelly time song. The worst yet has to be when Stewie made Brian eat his feces. When Brian and Stewie were trapped in a bank vault, Stewie pretended that he would get sick if he sat too long in a soiled diaper, so he made Brian eat his poop. However, Stewie later revealed that he made Brian do it because he just wanted to see if he could. Next is signing up him and Brian for the army. Stewie signed up for the army, and when he found out he could win a $100 bonus, he signed up Brian too without his permission.
You are both in the army.
We're both at what?
Things got out of hand when they got sent off to Iraq, and they had to take desperate measures to escape by doing things such as pretending to be gay and shooting each other in the foot. Next we have cutting off Brian's tail. While this wasn't done out of pure maliciousness, but rather out of carelessness, cutting off Brian's tail definitely counts as a bad deed. Stewie tried to help impress Brian's girlfriend's parents by hiding the fact that he's a dog. When Brian's tail started to wag, he asked Stewie to make it stop. Stewie made it stop by cutting the tail off. Next is stealing Brian's car. Brian leaves Stewie alone in the car, and then Stewie takes the car for a spin. He's a baby and doesn't have much experience behind the wheel, meaning this does not end well. Stewie crashed and damaged the front of the car because he was trying to win Justin Bieber tickets while driving. What's the lesson here? Don't talk on the phone while driving, especially if you're a baby. Next is framing Connie D'Amico. Stewie goes to high school disguised as his alter ego, Zach Sawyer. When he became popular, he went on a date with Connie D'Amico. Everything went well until Connie found out about Stewie's baby-sized penis, and he became the laughingstock of the whole school.
Is there more underneath, or is that it?
Stewie gets back at Connie by revealing his true identity in front of everyone and framing Connie as a child predator, and she gets arrested. While this definitely was cruel, we do have to argue it's not as bad as some of the other things Stewie has done, as this was out of retaliation. We should also mention that Connie is not a very good person, so she saw this coming. Next, we have using Brian's DNA to impregnate himself. While this wasn't entirely done out of malice because Stewie did it to get closer to Brian, it was still bad. Stewie did it without Brian's approval, and they ended up with a bunch of Stewie-Brian hybrid babies they could barely take care of. Due to Stewie being irresponsible, they abandoned the babies at an animal shelter.
I'm still keeping all the gifts from the baby shower.
Next is tying up Anne Murray. When Stewie and Brian had a newfound passion in listening to the music of Anne Murray, they visited her home to find out the meaning behind one of her songs. This visit, however, quickly turned into a hostage situation when Stewie angrily tied up Anne Murray and held her at gunpoint after finding out she never wrote her own songs. Next is another hostage situation. It's getting back at Bart's bully. In the crossover episode with The Simpsons, Stewie tried to impress Bart by getting back at his bully, Nelson. While this wasn't done entirely out of malice, because Stewie was doing this so Bart would like him, it still wasn't okay for Stewie to terrorize another kid. Stewie kidnapped Nelson, tied him up, and literally made him eat his shorts. Bart wasn't impressed by Stewie's gesture and instead was freaked out by it. The next is Grand Theft Auto. When Stewie and Brian were in Colorado trying to get Rupert back, Stewie ended up in a ski race with a family who took possession of his stuffed bear. Stewie lost the race. However, not being over Rupert, he threw hot tea in the son's eyes. Stewie and Brian took Rupert back and made a run for it. Without any transportation back to Rhode Island, Stewie carjacked a random guy on the street by holding him at gunpoint, and they made off with his vehicle. Next is assaulting Brian. Brian loses a bet with Stewie and failed to pay him the money he owed. Throughout the episode, Stewie assaulted Brian by mercilessly beating him until he paid up. He even tried drowning Brian in the toilet. and then he shot both his knees and lit him on fire. Stewie finally got his way when Brian gave in and paid him back after all the injuries. Next is committing arson. Stewie attempted to murder his girlfriend, Olivia, when he found her in the cardboard house with Victor. He lit the cardboard house on fire knowing both of them were in there. Luckily, Olivia somehow survived the fire as she returned in a future episode. Therefore, this doesn't technically count as a murder. However, the actions were just as malicious. Next is creating an evil clone of himself. This wasn't entirely intentional because Stewie was originally trying to make himself more evil, until he accidentally created an evil clone instead. However, it was still rooted in Stewie's need to cause terror and harm. The evil clone went around murdering. For example, one of the people he tried to kill was the Kool-Aid Man. However, we have to give Stewie props for realizing when the situation went too far and tried to stop his clone. The bronze medal of evil goes to attempting to kill Lois. This isn't as bad as the next few because Stewie never actually goes through with killing Lois. However, his relentless attempts deserve a mention. Trying to kill your own mother is not good. Stewie has an entire weapon room that Lois doesn't know about and is constantly using devices to scheme against her. While we don't see Stewie try to kill Lois as often as he used to, it's still something he does every now and then. However, there's always something that gets in the way whenever he tries to do it. In the episode Stewie Kills Lois, we actually get to see what would happen if Stewie killed Lois and took over the world. However, it was only a simulation and didn't actually happen. The silver medal of evil goes to letting his therapist die. While this doesn't involve Stewie directly murdering someone, it still takes the cake for the silver medal. Stewie opened up to his therapist and finally let his guard down to reveal secrets about himself. Stewie's therapist began to suffer from a heart condition, and instead of getting him his medications to save his life, Stewie let him die. Stewie only did this because he was afraid of the world or anyone else finding out who he really is. As bad as this was, it still technically wasn't a kill done out of anger, revenge, or hatred. We're not counting it as a murder because Stewie wasn't planning on his therapist dying, nor was the direct cause of his death. The therapist just died from a heart condition and he didn't do anything about it.
This is not your day.
And the gold medal of evil goes to murder. Stewie has killed a lot of people, so stick with us. Usually, Stewie's reason for wanting to kill someone is out of revenge, jealousy, anger, bitterness, or just petty. But let's go through them. First, we have Jeremy, which we would argue is not as bad as some of the other murders Stewie has committed. This death was more unintentional. However, Stewie did assault Jeremy and kidnap him. When Stewie had a crush on his new babysitter, he was jealous over her boyfriend Jeremy. Stewie assaulted Jeremy and hit him in the back of a car to make it look like he went missing. At the end of the episode, Stewie realized he accidentally left Jeremy in the trunk, killing him. Next is Denise Crosby. When Stewie zapped the entire cast of Star Trek The Next Generation to his room, he demanded that they spend the day together and answer his fan questions. However, when Denise Crosby responded, "But you're a baby," Stewie didn't take this well and shot her. Next is the Man in White. When Stewie celebrated his first birthday, he was afraid that the Man in White would put him back in the womb. This, of course, being the doctor who did Stewie's delivery on the day he was born. However, Stewie mistaken Meg's cult leader as the Man in White and murdered him. Next is the infamous Christmas home invasion. While we do have to argue that this started with good intentions, it quickly turned deadly. Stewie traveled to the North Pole to kill Santa, which is not a good deed. However, when Stewie and Brian arrive, the North Pole was not what they expected, and they find out that Santa would die if they don't save Christmas. Stewie and Brian take Santa's place and try to deliver all the presents in one night. However, things don't go as planned when they arrived at their first house, and it turned into a home invasion and double murder. The father of the family woke up in the middle of the night, and when he found Stewie and Brian, he mistaken them for burglars. Stewie killed him with a baseball bat and hid him in the closet. When the wife and daughter woke up and found the father's dead body, Stewie killed the wife with a baseball bat too, and tied up the little girl. Not only did Stewie and Brian ruin Christmas, but 2 innocent people were murdered, and a young child was traumatized. This is by far one of Stewie's worst deeds and one of the show's darkest moments.
Oh my God, we're in the wrong house.
Next is New Brian. The Griffins got a new, younger dog named New Brian. Stewie didn't like the new dog and the way the family was using him to replace Brian. When New Brian revealed to Stewie that he humped Rupert, Stewie got his revenge by murdering the new dog in a very brutal way. He chopped him up and put his remains in the garbage. However, he framed it as suicide. Next, we have Brian's siblings. You probably didn't see this because it was a cutscene from the extended DVD version of the episode, but this was by far one of Stewie's cruelest acts. When Stewie wanted Brian to buy him tickets to a Hannah Montana concert, he held Brian's siblings hostage until he got his way. He tortured them and killed one right in front of Brian. This has to be one of Stewie's most cruel murders for killing his best friend's long-lost brother right in front of him. This last one may come as a surprise, but it's being with Penelope. This is Stewie's worst murder yet, because it involved multiple terrorist attacks that most likely killed hundreds of thousands to possibly millions of people. Stewie had a new girlfriend named Penelope who was more evil than him and encouraged him to go around killing people and committing heinous crimes. They go from doing more harmless crimes, such as planning a bomb to go off every time Mort checks his wallet, to starting wars between countries. Some of the terrorist attacks they committed include blowing up the Great Wall of China and bombing the Eiffel Tower. They started a war between Pakistan and India, which led to endless destruction in the Middle East. Stewie also destroyed Copenhagen with a giant tidal wave. Things went so far that Brian took notice of Stewie's increase in evil activity due to Penelope's bad influence and told him he should stay away from her. Penelope didn't take this well and told Stewie to kill Brian for her. Although he didn't do it, it's worth mentioning that Stewie came close to killing his best friend because of this relationship.